Welcome to this chess course. First off, I want to congratulate you on getting the course. I think it's a great idea. Chess is pretty much the richest game out there, and it really has this appeal that's so hard to understand. I mean, Howard Stern, Bill Gates, Martin Shkreli, Clay Thompson, Priest Holmes, the Klitschko brothers, medical doctors, lawyers. I see them all playing chess. And, one of the things that I've heard personally from medical doctors is that they want to create those masterpieces. It's just the ultimate mind game. Even if you have, a really taxing, high service job, there's just something really special about chess, something really beautiful about chess, and something really intellectual about chess. It's just such a challenging game. So just want to congratulate you on actually getting this course. And I think really only a few hours of knowledge is necessary to be able to beat probably 99% of the people that you'll ever play. So it's nice to be able to beat people like people at work, your friends, anybody in a game of chess. And it's something that comes up surprisingly often. You go out to a bar, there's a chess set there. You go to a little party, someone whips out a chess set. See it happen all the time. So very good choice on getting this course. I'm International Master Eric Kislik, and I myself got into chess because I played in a tournament when I was 13 and I was just hypnotized by the game. I just realized, wow, this game is really, really deep, and I just love the strategy behind it. And when I really got into the strategy of chess, I started to think, wow, this has so many parallels to life. So many things like slowly building up your position, having no weaknesses, and just kind of building yourself up throughout life is a lot like what people do in a chess game. They kind of build up small advantages. They bring their pieces into the game, and then they finally launch an attack, usually. Not always, of course. But this is a common way that a game develops, even at pro level, or especially at pro level, I should say. So, first of all, I want to say that the goal of chess is checkmating the king. So, sometimes you can checkmate the king very early on in the game, and that's why it's very good to be aware of all of the straightforward, simple checkmates. All of the basic checkmates, I think, should be known and can be learned very quickly. So my recommendation is to watch all of the basic checkmates. Watch them 2, 3, 4 times. Make sure you know those, and I think you can get them down pretty quickly. So just to sum up, one of the basic ideas is that we're trying to checkmate the opponent's king. And there are a couple cases where we can checkmate the king where it will be trapped. So essentially on the back. So in chess, there are ranks and there are files. And so files go from A to H, and ranks go from 1 to 8. And when the king has all of its pawns, I'll show you some examples of this later, but basically when a king cannot move anywhere and is checked on the back rank with nothing to block with, then it's a back rank checkmate. And when you see a bunch of examples of this type of checkmate, it starts to become very simple to see. And I noticed that there are other checkmates on the side of the board that a lot of people just wouldn't consider, but it's the same idea. And the basic name of it is called the corridor mate. So it's kind of like you trapped somebody in a corridor and then they're done. So a lot of these things in chess are related to king safety because the goal of the game is checkmate. And if you're not able to checkmate the king, what you want to do after that, well, instead, I should say, to try to increase your chances of checkmating the king, 2 main goals. One is to try to win material that your opponent has. And if you win enough material, you'll just totally outnumber their army and be able to take lots of their pieces. Additionally, being able to queen a pawn, promote one of your pawns, is very, very important. I'll be talking about the pieces shortly after this. And another thing that's very important to realize in chess is that weakness is the basis for all tactics. So without anything actually weak in the opponent's position, it's very hard to land a deathly blow. Whereas, for instance, with something like fighting, it's very different because the human chin is quite weak. And if you take a hard shot, pretty much anybody can be done. So, in chess, it's a little bit different. Inherently, positions are very solid if one side makes no mistakes, puts all their pieces on pretty good squares, puts their king away into a safe place. So all of these things are very important to think about. And one thing that I want to say is that it's always been so amazing to me how the combative nature of chess really it really brings out so many interesting personalities and really excites so many players. And it's just the depth of the game, the amount of ideas and conceptions. It's really such a warlike game, and because of how warlike the game is, you're kind of like at the head of the chain of command. I think it's actually very interesting to think about chess strategy in terms of war strategy. So I want to start off and discuss some typical kind of war strategies, and then we'll see how they apply to chess, so that you can kind of conceptualize some of the strategies and what you might try to do, because there's a pretty heavy overlap, and it's actually very interesting when you factor all of that in. So ultimately, usually during wartime, the main three goals of either side in general, the first one is to conquer and destroy the enemy. In chess, that's not necessarily to capture all their pieces, it's to checkmate their king. And of course, capturing the main body of the enemy army is often very useful, of course. Taking possession of their material is very important as well. And occupying the opponent's capital, well, for instance, in a war. But in chess, what that would mean is taking control of the center, or taking control of the opponent's 7th rank very close to their king. And so essentially, what a lot of people do who are starting out in chess is they'll put a lot of their pieces on the side of the board, and they won't focus so much on the center. But the problem there is it's a little bit like, let's say you're trapped in a closet. It's kind of like that, where let's say you're in an apartment and somebody breaks into your apartment, and if you get trapped in the closet, you can't escape. Let's say you're in the main living room and you have 2 or 3 doors out. You might have 3 different options to get out, and that's the mobility factor. So it sounds like a strange analogy, a home invasion, but that's actually a pretty good one in chess. So if you're only playing on the side of the board and just kind of touching everything on the side and not paying attention to the center, if they're playing in the center, they're going to be controlling a lot more squares. So that's a very important one as well. So in chess, if you can win the opponent's material, win it. If you can occupy the center or put your rooks on the 7th rank, all of those things, yes, of course we want to do those things. And if we can conquer and destroy the enemy, of course we want to do that. Another thing that I want to talk about are more general strategies, more general war principles and strategies. And one of them is using your entire force with the utmost energy. In other words, don't waste time. And in chess, this is very important as well. One thing you may notice is that when a lot of people start playing, one of the first things they do is start moving the queen around. I have my queen here. Oops. They start moving the queen around, and they might move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row. But the problem is, if you're only playing with one piece, it's not going to be very effective, and you won't be playing with the utmost energy. And to really get the most energy out of your pieces, you have to have as many forces as possible participating. So that's a very important thing to think about. Another strategy is concentrating on the main point, and that's a very common thing. If, let's say, if you're playing for checkmate, you're thinking about, all right, well, where could I possibly checkmate them? What is weak? And you look for a way to take advantage of that. Another one is basically optimal utilization of force, and in other words, concentration of force. This is exactly what I was talking about, where if you play with your queen too much and don't focus on using some of your other pieces, if you don't bring your other pieces into the game, there can easily be a problem, because the thing is, you won't have enough concentration of force. Imagine your opponent has 4 pieces in play and you only have 1 in play. Those 4 pieces will easily be able to cover an attacked square whereas the one piece attacking probably won't be able to do much damage. It'll basically be a one-man mission when you could have a 5 or 6-man mission. So it's important to make sure that you have all of those pieces in play whenever possible. And I'm going to show plenty of examples of this. And another important thing is economy of effort. So, that basically means the resources, tools, weapons you have available, and you're going to want to be as economical as possible. So let's say you want to defend your king. What you might want to do is, if you can use 1 or 2 pieces to defend almost all the key squares next to your king, that is a great use of economy of force, because you're using minimal force, the minimal amount of pieces, to defend a lot of space. Likewise, if you can attack the same way, if you can attack, let's say, with 3 pieces, that's a very valuable thing to do as well. So another strategy I want to mention is flexibility. And flexibility, the analogy that I talked about with the home invasion, that's actually a pretty good one when it comes to flexibility. So if we're totally controlling the center, we can easily move from side to side. I can easily go over here or over here. I can easily go down here or back here. So if they're only controlling a small amount of space, they can't really move very well. So that's a really important thing to think about. So flexibility is really important, because not only does it give you the possibility to overstretch the defensive side, but also allows you to just generally change course. So whether you're attacking or defending, you can easily kind of juke your way out of things, go from side to side. You can go wherever you need to go. So flexibility is an important thing. And also, of course, like I was tying this into, cooperation is very important. Cooperation between your pieces. And I can totally remember when I was just starting out in chess, and I would always try these attacks with 1 piece, 2 pieces in play. And I would have these pieces just sitting in the corner, not participating at all. And it's basically like, imagine that you're the CEO of a company. You're running this company, or let's say you're running a restaurant or something, and you have a couple of your workers who just like to hang out in the fridge and just kind of hang out, play on their cell phones. They're not doing any work. And you're like, hey guys, get back to work. That's exactly the problem if you have inactive pieces that are not doing anything. So I'll show you some examples of pieces that are out of play, not doing anything, and the importance of bringing them into play. So if there's not a lot of action going on, if there are no direct threats, there's nothing kind of exploding, nothing that exciting going on, a very useful strategy is just to improve your worst placed piece. If you have a piece that's badly placed, you want to bring it in. And we want to develop our forces. We want everything to come into the game. So we want everything to come into the game as quickly as possible and as energetically as possible, because, like I said before, we don't want to waste time. So another thing is that security is very, very important. And what I mean by that is, I mean security for your king. And that is exactly why early in the game, usually, not always, but usually one side will put their king in the corner. And the whole point is that you put your king in the corner of the board, and if the king is in the corner, then it's going to be much harder to attack and much easier to protect, because from the corner it can't be attacked as easily on both sides. It can only be attacked on one side. And that's a very important point. But I do want to mention that sometimes the king is safe in the center. There are 2 main cases where the king would be safe in the center. The first one where it's safe in the center is when the center is completely closed. There are no open files. When there are no open files, then that's a typical case where you can just keep everything closed, no problem, your king cannot be attacked. Another one is when enough pieces have been traded off that your king is no longer a target. And I do want to mention that the king can be a very useful piece in any kind of endgame. It can actually be quite an active attacking piece. So in some cases we can use the king as an attacker, and in other cases the king can itself run away from an attack. So if we can run away from a dangerous battlefield and run to a safer quadrant or section, then that can very often be a good strategy itself. So it is important to realize that the king has flexibility itself, but we do need to be careful, because if the king has no actual pawn cover, we can easily be in some danger. So we have to be careful about exposing our king too much. We can advance pawns in front of our king as long as it's not exposed or as long as they can't take advantage of that. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Another thing that you should keep in mind is to just be aware that there's an opponent on the other side. They have their own plans and their own ideas and their own threats. And theory of mind is a very important principle. It basically means that you're putting yourself into their shoes and considering what are their desires, what are their wants, what are they trying to do. And when you're aware, even loosely aware, even if you have a slight awareness of what they're trying to do, where they're trying to attack you, what they think is weak, then you're already in a better position. You have more information than you did before, so you can make a more informed decision. So theory of mind is very important in chess. And the last general principle I want to talk about before we get into more specifics about how the pieces move, some checkmates, some queen traps, things like that, is perseverance. And I have a saying, which I made up myself, and I think it's quite useful. I say, don't despair, look for compensation. And what I mean by that is you'll play games where suddenly you lose a pawn, suddenly you lose a piece. The important thing then is to not panic. Don't freak out about it. Start to think about, well, what are the positive sides of my position? What kind of compensation can I get? Can I attack something? Is their king weak? Can I expose their king somehow? So there are cases where you might be down 2 pawns or 3 pawns, and you might be able to even play a sacrifice that doesn't look correct. Maybe it's very risky. But if it exposes their king and gives you some real chances into the game, then you might pull yourself back into the game. So always look out for those chances. Always look out for that compensation. There are a lot of cases where you think to yourself, oh no, it looks like I'm losing a piece. But you pause, you look around the board, you think, wait, can I attack their king? No, okay. Can I attack their queen? Can I attack something valuable? Can I attack their rook? And sometimes when you're just looking around the board for something valuable to target and attack, you might go, okay, well, my guy's in danger, but I can attack something even more valuable or of equal value. And a lot of the time, that's going to save you in games. This ability to consider ideas where you're attacked, but it's not a game-ending kind of attack. Let's say they're attacking a piece, and they expect you to move it or defend it, but instead you counterattack. So that's very important to look for those possibilities, especially when you're really not sure, when you're really kind of basically afraid. You're thinking, oh no, I'm just losing now. So the last thing with kind of a loose connection to perseverance is never have self-doubt when you're attacking. And the reason for that is, well, I mean, I've had games myself where I've played players who are in the top, let's say 30 in the world, and I just couldn't believe that I was outplaying them. I couldn't believe I was about to checkmate them. I couldn't believe I was about to win the game. And it's a really unhealthy thing to think. You basically, if you have a strong attack going, you have to just be objective. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to go, okay, I have worked really hard for this advantage. I have outplayed this, very good player. And now I need to push this home. I need to press hard. I need to look for the best moves. And I need to basically not be intimidated. Okay, I'm playing a great player. I'm playing, they're good. They're stubborn. They're putting up a lot of resistance. But you know what? I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to put them under pressure. And I'm going to play with the utmost energy and try to crush them. So that's very, very important to keep in mind. So on to the pieces. I don't know if everyone will know how to move the pieces, but that's something to learn very, very quickly, and which can be learned very quickly, of course. But I'll go from the least valuable to the most valuable. So the first one is the pawn, and what I'll say about this is that on the first move, on the very first move, you can move your pawn 2 spaces ahead. And so only when your pawn is on its initial square can you move it 2 spaces ahead. And otherwise, you can only move it 1 square ahead. But captures and squares that it's controlling are diagonal to the pawn. And that can be a little bit confusing when you first encounter it. So I'm going to show some checkmates after this, which will show the pawn supporting a queen for some checkmates. So the pawn is the least valuable unit, and it has a value of 1, basically by everybody's metric. So the pawn is the least valuable thing in chess, but they're very important for protecting your king. And they're also important sometimes for attacking. They're important for controlling the center. They're important for many things. So we shouldn't use them loosely. Very often in games, we want to plant a pawn in the center of the board to secure space, and we call that a stronghold. So oftentimes very early in the game, we plant a pawn, and it's basically like we're planting a stake for our army, and we're saying, you know what, we're controlling this part. We're controlling this part of the center, and we're not going to let you cross. We're not going to let you cross the middle of the board. We're not going to let you in. We're going to be stubborn. We're going to control everything, and we're not going to make it easy for you. So the pawn might be the least valuable, but it's very important to handle it well. So we're going to see examples of this later on, but hopefully the movements will become clear. The minor pieces, there's a knight, and I assume most people know how a knight moves. A knight moves in an L shape. Basically, it moves 1 square over and 2 up in any direction, of course. So basically what that means is that when a knight moves, anytime it moves, it's a hop. It's a hopping motion. And so essentially what that means in terms of a knight is that in closed positions, or if the play is in a small quadrant of a board, a knight is quite effective because it has those unusual movements in that part of the board. So knights are very important in terms of knights, for one thing, are actually quite good at defending the king, because imagine you have your king in one part of the board, you have your knight nearby, and it's controlling a whole bunch of squares with its weird L-shaped control. So it can often have that kind of spider web type of defensive ability. So the knight is very important in that regard, in just controlling everything. And also when you're attacking the opponent's king, likewise, a knight in close proximity to the opponent's king can be a very good attacker as well. So when a knight has a very good outpost or a very strong, stable square, both in attack and in defense, it's very valuable. Of course, a lot of the time, a knight doesn't quite find a great square for itself. So that can be an issue in itself because it's a shorter range piece and it's mostly maneuvering and working in small quarters, in close quarters. But the knight is very important in that regard, so we'll be looking at some examples. We'll be looking at some examples of checkmates involving the knight, just kind of emphasizing the power of the knight in close proximity to the opponent's king. So the next piece is the bishop, and basically how the bishop moves is diagonally. And essentially what that means, and this is something that a lot of people don't pick up on, what that means is because it moves diagonally as many squares as it wants in whichever direction it can go in, sometimes a bishop can actually be an effective piece on its initial square. Because a bishop can be on its starting square and it might actually be kind of shooting through space and controlling some important squares. And sometimes you can kind of pull it back and have it kind of block your king. So the bishop, two bishops together, when two bishops are assisting each other in attacking, they're very effective because they control different color diagonals. So it's like you have these two laser beams shooting and controlling a whole bunch of open space. And if you have two bishops and your opponent only has a bishop and knight, if they don't have two bishops, then your unopposed bishop is going to be a very important piece because they don't have the same bishop. So we'll talk about some checkmates with the bishops, how to get those pieces more active, what you want to do with it later on. And the rooks usually very early on in the game are unable to do that much because they're in the corner. They start off in the corner and they move in straight lines. So, as far as they want in a straight line, horizontally or vertically. So rooks are very important, usually as more and more pieces get traded off, because then they usually have more open lines. But the rook is the second most valuable piece, and two rooks compared to a queen, two rooks are slightly more valuable than a queen. And one of the things is that when two rooks are playing against a queen, they can sometimes try to overpower it. Basically, have two pieces attacking one square or one pawn, whereas the queen is trying to defend. I do want to say, though, just if you want to think about it in number terms, basically a rook is worth a little bit. So I said that a pawn is worth 1. The bishop and the knight are both worth about 3.5, and the rook is worth a little bit more than 5, and the queen is worth 10. And these numbers were arrived at through very deep computer research and analysis, so they're very accurate to like the 99.999 percentile. But it's very useful actually, because if you think about imbalances, like, oh, my opponent has this piece and I have this other piece, you can compare an imbalance. So let's say for example you have a rook for your opponent's knight. Your rook being slightly more than 5 is worth a lot more than their 3.5. And part of that is because the rook's mobility is so much greater than not only the bishop, but also the knight. So it's important to have very clear ideas on material and make sure that you're not giving up material. And so the last two pieces are the queen and the king. I know they look kind of similar, but they're a little bit different here. But basically the queen can move in any direction, as many squares as it wants. And it's really, really important to have a good handling on the queen, because you want to be careful about having the queen really just moving around in the center very early on in the game, because the queen, when it's attacked by a much weaker piece like a knight, it's going to have to move right away. So you want to be careful about putting your queen in a position where it's vulnerable to piece attacks by other pieces. So the queen's really important in that regard, and sometimes finding a great square for the queen can be really, really valuable in long-term chess strategy. If you have a really dominant queen and the opponent has a bad queen, you'll often have a big advantage on the basis of having better pieces. So I'm going to show a bunch of interesting examples where a queen gets trapped. And if you can trap the opponent's queen, and you'll probably be surprised by how many cases will come up simply because they're unexpected, simply because your opponents probably will have no idea what you're doing. They'll go, what? My queen is trapped? I can't even move it? So that's something which I'm going to show a bunch of examples of, and you'll probably be really surprised by them. But if you trap your opponent's queen, let's say with a knight, you'll have so much more material than your opponent, you'll be able to overpower them with your army, usually with very direct play, very direct and energetic play, using all your pieces together. So lastly, the king, very important to focus on king safety, having your king safe, being very aware of how safe yours is compared to how safe is your opponent's. Because if your king has no pawn cover, it's out in the open, they're just running after your king, you can be in big trouble. So always try to make sure that I'm very aware of exactly how safe my king is. So king safety is a huge, huge deal. The king can move one square in every direction. So it's like the queen, but the queen can move infinitely in any direction, whereas the king can only move one square. But I do want to say that if the king is totally safe and you're really late in the game, like lots of pieces have been traded off, the king can be a very good active piece, because sometimes your king will just march straight up the board and maybe might support, let's say, a passed pawn. You might be trying to, well, one of the things which is very important about pawns is if you push your pawn all the way to the edge of the board, to the end of your opponent's 8th rank, to the end of the board, you can get a new queen. And, so basically you're trading your value of 1 for 10. So that's a big deal. If you can promote a pawn, that is a really huge deal. So you're going to also want to pay attention to that. And one piece of advice I have, if you're totally winning, you have way more pieces than the opponent, a really simple strategy you can play that a lot of people don't think about is just try to march your pawns up the board as fast as possible. You might just have a pawn that can just go boop, 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 just run straight up the board. If you can run your pawn straight up the board and you're up tons of material, you get a new queen, let's say you get a second queen, you have two queens, it's very easy to checkmate the opponent's king with two queens because they control so many squares. So it's really important that you handle your pieces like that, and make sure that if you're up a lot of material that you focus, or at least don't neglect the possibility of really just trying to queen pawns. And late in endgames, there are entire endgames. There are just entire libraries of positions where the only way to even get winning chances, even get a chance to win the game, is to try to promote a pawn and get a queen. So when you push your pawn to the other end of the board, you don't have to get a queen. You can actually pick whatever piece you want besides a pawn. But since the queen is the most valuable, I would say, I don't want to say 99%, but about 95% of the time we do want to pick a queen when we get to the edge of the board. So it's very, very important that you pay attention to these things, because I can show you lots of examples where, late in the game, people are like, oh, I'm up a lot of material. Oh, I don't have that much time left. Or, oh, I couldn't figure out what to do. But the simplest plan, if you're up a ton of pieces and you don't know what to do, is try to queen a pawn. Try to push your pawn straight down the board and try to queen it. So hopefully you're able to use some of this advice. I'm going to move on to showing you basically how pieces move in action. So there's a nice feature on chess.com, and I'll show you that one in a second. So I want to show you a nice application on chess.com that you can try out. On chess.com, if you go to Learn, you can go to Vision, and keep in mind, chess.com, you can register on it in about 1 minute. It's free. Click on Vision, and you click on this target, and then you go to Moves. And notice when we look around this board, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. See, we have the B5 square here, C4 here, D4 here, E4. That's why E4 is a very common initial first move. F5 is here, G6 is here. I'm going to show you how I go through the moves. So I'm going to do this program here. The first move it gave me was bishop to A5. So I move my bishop to A5. It says rook to F1. I move my rook over to the F1 square. It says H5. So I advance my pawn up to the H5 square. It says king to A4. I move back to the A4 square. Knight to F8. I move my knight down here to F8. It says rook to G6. I move my rook over to G6. B7. Queen to H8. Okay, I'll try to do it faster this time. Okay, I only got 7 on this one. Let's try it again. King E6, King E5, G5, Rook B2, Knight E4, F7, Queen D3, E7, Rook A7, King G5, Knight D4, Queen B3, long range, Knight F6, King A5, Queen G7, Rook B1, Queen C8. Ooh, some long range moves here. G4, Bishop A4, King H3. Rook B3, bishop to B7, Queen C7, King B5, Rook G5. Okay, actually that was pretty good. That's pretty good. So I implore you to spend 5 minutes and try this. Try it 7 times, 8 times, 9 times. You'll probably get the coordinates down pretty quickly. You'll probably get the movements down very quickly. As I said, the knight moving in the L shape, the bishops moving diagonally, the queen moving in all directions, a pawn moving 2 squares only on its initial move, having the option of moving 1 or 2. And there are some rules like en passant, where if you move the pawn up 2 squares and there's a pawn on an adjacent file on the 4th rank right here, they can take en passant, but you don't need to focus on that too much right here. You can look that up if you're really interested in it, but for the most part, we just want to get the basics down. So I think a really important thing to move on to now, just because chess is so focused on checkmating and king safety, and the ultimate goal is checkmating, I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of different checkmates. So let's get our discussion of checkmates underway. Ultimately, the goal of all of these checkmates is to check the king in such a way that the king cannot get out of check. They have no way to capture our checking piece, nothing to block with, and nowhere to go with their king. And so in this particular case, the king is on, notice before I said that there are different files. These kind of vertical rows are called files. So this is the A file right here. This is the B file. This is the C file, the D file, E file, F file, G file, H file. And these are the ranks. And this is the back rank for black, and that's why it's called back rank mate. And so notice how the pawns are blocking black's king from moving anywhere. So if we play the move rook to d8, it's immediately checkmate because our rook, moving in a straight line, however far it can go, is controlling all of the squares that the king could go to, and it cannot move up because it's blocked by its own pawns. So this is a check on the weak back rank leading to an immediate mate. And I'm going to show some more complicated versions of this basic concept so you can see it all laid out. So let me go on to the next one. So here is a more complicated version. So basically here, what's more complicated is that there's a pawn on f6 which controls the g7 square. So technically the black king's back rank is vulnerable because he can't really run away easily because this pawn is controlling g7 diagonally. So white goes queen to h5, and this is a kind of a nifty move because I'm attacking the bishop, and notice that if the bishop moves back, then I have checkmate on h7. And it's checkmate because my knight, moving in the L shape of course, is defending the queen, controlling the square h7, and notice how the king has no way to escape the checks and cannot capture the queen. So this is a very simple checkmate in this case, but what I want to mention here is what happens after they take. So here we have a different form of mate known as a queen and pawn mate. Notice how the pawn is controlling the g7 square. So we're threatening queen to g7 mate. But here's the thing. If they go rook to g8 now, this looks like the obvious move. Now they're controlling the g7 square. They're preventing us from checkmating on g7. But now, by taking advantage of the weak back rank, we have a beautiful little sequence where we sacrifice our queen, and I know it's very hard to sacrifice your queen because the queen is the most valuable piece. So sacrificing a queen for a rook, which is about half as valuable, is difficult to do. But here, the important point to notice is after you sacrifice, look at the back rank. All of these squares can be controlled by the rook on d8. And the pawn on f6 is controlling the g7 square. So it means that the king has nowhere to go. The king can't move up. So we have kind of, you could say, an applied back rank mate. So here we go, rook to d8, and it's mate. f8, g8, h8, all of these squares are covered by the rook, and the g7 escape square, or running square, if you will, is covered by the pawn. So that's a nice case of a back rank mate. And what we're going to move on to is, well, after this one, we're going to move on to corridor mates. And a corridor mate is basically the same thing. This is where your back rank is weak, and the other one is where your side file is weak, you could say. So here's a really nice concept. Another beautiful concept, sacrificing our queen. So in this case, we can play the move queen to b2. And this is really shocking because our queen can just be captured by the rook. And normally we reject these moves. We go, oh, our queen's going to get captured. But notice, look at the back rank. The pawns are blocking the king, and we're trying to get this possibility of checking their king. If we can check their king and they can't block and they can't capture our piece, if they can't get out of the check, it's just checkmate. And their back rank is very vulnerable. So if they take on b2, now I'm going to take their rook. You see here, all they can do is throw their pieces at me while I checkmate them. Take, here, and I have a simple mate. So a very simple checkmate here. They have nothing that they can do to stop me. And what's also very nice is what if they bring their queen back to try to defend and try to stop the checkmate? Well, what I can do here is I can use my queen and my rook on the 7th rank to simply capture on f2. So you see the queen is defended by the rook, and the king has to move away because it's checked by the queen. So the king moves into the corner, and now I simply capture the g2 pawn, and it's checkmate. All of the squares are covered, no defense. So this is a really nice one. This is a really nice case of using the weak back rank, and that weak back rank is precisely why people often play moves like h2, h3 to give the king Luft, which is a German word for space, giving the king space to run to so it's not vulnerable and they don't have a weakness in the form of a back rank weakness. So that's definitely something to watch out for. So we're going to move on now to corridor mates, which is one of my favorite types of mates. I mean, it's basically like you get taken down a back alley and basically beaten badly. You have no way to get out of this. You're just trapped. And here after rook to h3, all the squares are covered. The rook covers all these squares, and the queen prevents the king from running away to the g file. So our queen moving in all directions infinitely, and the rook moving vertically and horizontally cover all the squares here. So everything on the g file, everything on the h file is covered. We have a nice kind of very clear version of a corridor mate. And it's basically like we trap them in a corridor, they've got nowhere to go, and that's the end. So you'll see a different version of this, but this is a very good one. This is one that a lot of people forget about, because a lot of people get the back rank mate ones down, but don't notice the side mates, like this corridor mate. So here's an interesting case. In this position, black has 5 pawns and white has 2 pawns. And so white's down 3 pawns, and the black king seems to be safe here, but white is actually able to remove the pawn on a6, sacrificing the queen there and playing for a corridor mate, because the rooks control everything along the A and B corridors, and the king is just in no man's land. So queen takes a6, king takes a6. This is basically applying the corridor mate. And by the way, if you're ever in a situation where you're trying to checkmate a lone king with 2 rooks, setting up a corridor mate is probably the simplest thing to do, because you can just keep chasing the king down and pushing it further to the corner. Then once it gets to the corner, you set up the corridor mate. So all black can do is just give back the piece, and then there's rook takes a4 mate. So simple checkmate, controlling all the squares. On the A and B file, no way to escape. Just a nice simple corridor mate. And there are different variations on this theme. Here's a more complicated version. So here's a case where black has is down 1 piece. White has an extra bishop on b2. But notice how this pawn on f4 controls the g3 square. So essentially, if we go for a corridor mate, we don't quite get a normal corridor mate, but I call it a corridor mate with a bishop. So if I sacrifice the queen here, take, I check with my rook. So notice how I have all the squares covered here. The pawn covers g3. The only square is g2 free, but here I have bishop h3 check. So I check the king, and then I cover all the squares. What we're trying to do when we checkmate kings, just like this, is we're trying to cover all the squares. We're trying to make sure all of the squares are attacked. And so what my goal is here is just to show you all of the different main ways that we set up these checkmates, all of the most famous and known checkmates. So I check. Notice how all of these squares are covered. The king has to go back to the h file, and now we cut off the king. So the king is trapped on the h file, the g2 square covered by the bishop, and the g4 pawn is controlling the g3 square, so it's just checkmate here. I'll show it again. It's a very easy sequence to miss because, again, people do not want to give up their queen. Queen is the most valuable piece. But if we give it up here, get the check, and the king just doesn't have squares. It's just as simple as that. So what it all comes down to is just recognizing what squares are attacked. So the key point here is just to see more and more examples of these, and that's why I'm going to show you a bunch of them, because if you see the basic theme and the way to set up the theme, then you have a much greater chance of finding it. Just seeing more examples is really the key here. So let me go on to the next one. All right, so here we have kind of a variation on the corridor mate. And the variation is that our knight is covering these two squares. Remember, it's moving in this L shape. So I'm controlling g8 and I'm controlling g6, and the g7 pawn is blocking the king's escape. So what I do here is I just simply check, and it's a variation on the corridor mate. I've just basically trapped the king on the corridor. Has nowhere to go. Can't go here, can't go here. So it's just a done deal. So this is a very good mate to be aware of, and I think a lot of people can easily miss this. Let me show you a variation of this mate. And by the way, if I'm moving through this a little bit quickly, then definitely watch this over again, because you're probably going to want to review this at least again in a week or something. At least the sections where I'm showing you the chess positions, because these patterns are recurring patterns. So in this example, this is just one that I created just off the top of my head. So if I check, I'm checking the king, and the king has only one square. You see, everything else is blocked by their own pieces. They go king to h8. And now, the mate that I showed before is called Anastasia's mate, which is a variation on the corridor mate. And you could remember it if you ever knew a woman named Anastasia. If not, just think of it as the corridor mate. But anyway, here we can brutally sacrifice our queen on h7. And I put the queen on b1 just to make this distance extra long and have the rook move long distance across the board. But look at how all of the squares are covered. That's how you checkmate the king here. You see? g8's covered. g6 is covered. Cover everything here. Take. We have mate. Let me show it again. So basically, really what this comes down to is just realizing that you're controlling all of the king's escape squares with your knight, and you're covering all the squares on the h-file with your rook. Take, take, rook h3 check. All they can do is block for a move, we take it, and it's checkmate. So being aware of all of these checkmates is going to be very useful for you, because you may have games where the opponent is just careless and just falls into the mate, or they might not even know about the mate. That can happen too. So this is a very useful one to be aware of. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, here's a really simple one. The queen and pawn mate. And I discussed it before. Basically, we're going queen g7 mate. Nothing complicated, but again, good to look at it in the simplest, purest form, just to make sure you're familiar with it. Just to be as clear as possible on it. So that's a good one to be aware of. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so this one is called Damiano's mate. Damiano was a player from lived in the 1400s and 1500s, and he was a player who executed this mate multiple times. And the checkmate here is just queen to h7. And the reason why it's checkmate is that the pawn controls the f7 square, controls the h7 square, and everything is under control. And notice that the king is blocked by their own piece. So oftentimes checkmates work because the defensive side just is simply blocked in. They're locked in by their own pieces. You know, it's like when you're trapped in a train and you can't move. That's basically what happens here with the black king. So I'll show you a nice variation on this same mate here. Okay. So here's an interesting case of it. Black is up a rook and a bishop for white's 2 pawns on the queen side. But here, and I also want to make a point here, in terms of playing energetically and playing with force, to play with force here with white would mean to play for checks. Because when you're playing direct checks, they have to react to the check. And what we can do here to set up Damiano's mate is I don't want to check on c4 because then they can block the check with a piece. So I'm going to play rook h8 check. Here's the point. King takes h8. I have queen h4 check. And now if king to g8, I have queen h7 mate. I've sacrificed a rook with tempo, and when we say with tempo, we mean with time. So we're gaining time, we're doing it by force, and then we swing the queen over with check, and as I said, when the king is in check, they have to react to the check, so they move the king over, and then we have Damiano's mate. So this was just a case of setting up Damiano's mate, and it's not that difficult of a concept, but you know, when you've seen the mate, you have to see different ways to apply the mate, and then it's much easier to do it yourself. So with all of the common mates, you're going to want to see the most typical sorts of examples of executing them. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, here's one of my favorite ones, Grieco's mate. And this is a lot like a corridor mate because we're having the bishop control the g8 square. So here we just simply go queen h5, and notice how our queen is controlling h6, h7, and g8. And our bishop is preventing the king from escaping via g8 because we just simply control it. So everything is under control and white just wins on the spot. So queen h5 check is a nice execution of Grieco's mate. And I'll show you how I applied the idea during a game, just so you can see it in a kind of complicated form actually. So I had this position against a 2300 player, a FIDE master, and I must say my opponent was totally shocked when I executed this, when I played this. So I'll show you the sequence I played. Notice that my queen is attacked by their knight on f7, and my queen is undefended here, so it's not like I'm going to play bishop takes f7 and lose my queen on g5. So what I played here was I played rook takes f7. So I'm threatening mate here. They played rook takes f7. And now, here's where you see the value in knowing about Grieco's mate and being very familiar with that pattern. So what I did here was I played rook takes h7 check. Take, take, check. King to g8. Now I took with the queen, and now I finally am able to set up Grieco's mate because I have queen h5 and I'm preventing king to g8. King h7, queen h5 was checkmate. My queen covers all the squares on the h-file, covers g6, and my bishop is conveniently preventing the king from escaping via g8. So you might wonder, oh, well, who would this work against? Well, it worked against the FIDE master, so sometimes these things work against anybody. I mean, Vladimir Kramnik was world champion and he fell for a mate and won. So, you know, you never know what somebody can fall for. So you always have to keep your eyes peeled for these mates, be very aware of them, and just get more and more familiar with these types of executions of them. So let me go on to the next one. Here's a nice mate, and I'm showing the long-range version of it, and this is called the Paulette mate, and it's kind of an old classic mate, you know, where they have the two rooks blocking the king. So the rook is just preventing the king from running away, and the queen covers d7, e7, f7, and also covers the e8 square by checking. So with one single check, we have a mate, and there's nothing that can be done. So it's always good to be aware of these direct checkmates like queen e6. And if it's a long-range move, like a queen moving from a6 or from h3, it's very easy to miss these moves. So it's really good to also kind of conceptualize it. What am I trying to do? Well, trying to prevent the king from being able to run away while being in check, controlling all the squares. Queen e6 does it nicely with an Paulette mate. So what's the next one here? Oh yeah, here's one that I call a Christmas tree mate. Basically, my queen here is controlling all of these squares. And what you'll also see is the f7 pawn for black is controlling these squares. So the king has all these squares covered by the queen, and then the two remaining squares covered by the f7 pawn. So there's no way to get out of that. We just go queen to f4 checkmate. So that's a good one to be aware of. And it can be sometimes hard to wrap your head around, are you controlling all the squares? And that's why it's good to kind of see it and think about what squares are your pieces controlling. Because this was a little bit hard for me when I started, just being aware of, well, am I covering all the squares? But that's why these checkmating patterns are so valuable, because you see that you're controlling everything. And after this, we're going to look at queen traps. And the queen traps are even, I would say, even more tricky, because you have to be aware that the queen is unable to move. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so here's a classic, the smothered mate, where the knight just smothers the king, and the king is simply unable to move, blocked in by his own pieces. So this is the classic smothered mate, and during a game, you're almost never, rarely are going to get a clear-cut just knight f7 mate, but that's why you often will have to create it. So let me show you a typical example. Here's an example right here. So black has these rooks here. It looks like they're nearby, ready to defend. I play knight f7 check. So I'm checking the king. They must react. If they take with the rook, the problem is, look at their back rank. Their back rank now has no defense, so we can play for a back rank checkmate. All they can do is block and give up their rooks. We just take them with our queen, and we have a simple checkmate because they just can't get out of check, and we've mated them on the back rank. But here's how we execute. Here's how we execute the smothered mate here. We get a double check. Double checks are very valuable to be aware of. I'm checking with the knight, and I'm checking with the queen. When you're double checking, the opponent always has to move their king, because they cannot remain in check after their move. So they have to move the king. And here, what we do is we decoy their rook with the excellent queen to g8 check. The first position I was ever quizzed on by a professional player was a smothered mate just like this. And it was almost insulting to my chess skill because, I've been playing for a couple years and they showed me this, but this is a good one to be aware of. This is a nice pattern to know, that we distract the rook from f8 to g8 so that now the king is trapped in the corner, and then we just smother that guy. Just can't get out. So yeah, he's suffocated. There's also a checkmate called a suffocation mate, where it's similar to this, where the king is just basically mated by a knight and is unable to get out of the checks. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, here's one that's very easy to miss. It's called the hook mate. And you have a hook that's supporting your f6 knight, and you play rook to e8 mate. And the point is, our rook is controlling d8, e8, f8, and all of the squares on the e file, e8, e7, e6. Our pawn controls d6 and f6, and our knight is controlling d7. This is a good pattern to commit to memory. And notice how the f7 pawn is blocking the black king from running away. So this is quite a valuable checkmating pattern that's really easy to miss. If you haven't seen it before, it's not that easy to realize it if you haven't seen it before, but that's exactly why I'm showing you the pure distilled version of it. So let's go on and look at some more of these. This one is called the Arabian mate, and this happens when you have a knight. I mean, there are different versions of it, but here's a typical one with a knight on f6, just supporting rook to h7 mate. And you see how the rook is defended, and the king is attacked on h8 and can't go to g8 either because the knight covers that square too. So the Arabian mate is something you have to watch out for if the king is in the corner and there's a knight very close by, if there's a rook that can come down to, let's say, a square just like this one, h7, can be bad news for the defensive side. So here's one which I think is good just from the perspective of being eye-opening. So in this position, the knights control a lot of squares. You know, you see the knight here controls this and this. The knight here controls e5 and g5, and the bishop on d2 controls f4. Knight on e4 is blocking. The h3 pawn is controlling g4. So notice how everything is controlled. So all we need is to check the king. If we can get one check in, it's checkmate. So we go g2, g4, and it's checkmate. And I think this might be shocking to some people because it might be kind of visually hard to appreciate that you're controlling all the squares. But just take a look again. Your knights control all of this. Everything else is defended. So these kinds of mates are sometimes ones that can be a little bit tricky to spot. But if you spot it and recognize it, you'll definitely catch on to realizing that all the squares are controlled. So it's a little tricky to see, but once you see it, you'll recognize it. So that's a nice one. I like this one quite a lot. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so I wanted to show a couple of bishop checkmates. And here's a simple one. When you have two bishops against the king, just a lone king here, the simplest way to win is chase the king into the corner, either corner. You check. Notice how the bishop covers the f8 square. So we're just kind of slicing through the position. King has to go to the corner. We go bishop e5, checkmate. And you see how all the squares are covered, and the king covers the h7 square, so it can't move up. This is a nice thing to be aware of, because if the king is in the corner and there are bishops just kind of mowing him down this way, it can easily be a checkmate. So that's something to be aware of. One of the harder mates right here is called Boden's mate. And what's tricky about Boden's mate is that we have crisscrossing bishops that control all four squares to lead us to mate. See this? b8, c7, b7, c8. So we control all the squares with bishop a6 mate. Here and here. And notice how the d8 and d7 squares are occupied by pieces, so the king can't run to those squares. So this is a nice crisscrossing kind of power of the bishops. And I'll show an application of this same idea, but you're probably going to want to watch this a couple of times just to be really familiar with these types of things. And you may even want to set up a chessboard and just kind of play it out. So here's kind of a funny illustration of it. We're down a bishop for rook, and they also have an extra pawn. But what we have here, notice the black king has no squares. When you notice that the black king is cut off like this, you can see that they have potential king weakness problems. So it can be very difficult to defend this. And what you'll see here is there's the beautiful move, queen takes c6 check, which looks totally shocking because you think, uh-oh, I'm just losing my queen. They just take with the pawn. And you see your threatening mate on c7. Well, they don't have any move to block with, so we're just mating unless they capture it. But now we get to execute Boden's mate. The exact mating pattern that I showed you before. Here and here. And our bishops slice through the position, controlling all four of these squares. b7, c8, b8, c7. Just a nice simple checkmate there. So that works out perfectly. And let's see what else we have here. Okay, I'll show you a couple of cases of the escape square for the king, where a king tries to run away, but is covered. And what you can see here, you see the bishop covers the e7 square. So the king would like to run away, but it can't. So I check on h7. I have my rook and my queen attacking the king. And here I play the surprising move, queen to h8 check. I give up my queen, but the whole point is, I give up my queen, they take it, and then I have rook takes h8 mate. And this is just kind of a variation on back rank mate, because it's like a back rank mate, but they just can't walk their king up. So I'm just controlling all the squares on their back rank. I'm covering e7. They have nothing they can do, so I'll just show it again. Queen h7, queen h8 check, giving up the queen, and then a nice mate. So I think there's some harder ones coming up here. Okay, here's an interesting one. Here's an interesting one. We're playing black. The white king is quite vulnerable on h4. Since it's so vulnerable there, I would love to try to check it. Notice how it has no safe squares. All the squares are covered. Of course, if I go g5 check, the king comes to h5. It has only one safe square. I don't want to check and then allow the king to run back. So I don't want to go rook e4 check. But if I play... So what I'm thinking here is, what are the forcing checks I can play? If I check, the king comes to h5. Okay. Important lesson here is, if I had one good check against that king, I would be checkmating. So what that means is, well, I need to try to look for any way to checkmate it, and if I don't have a checkmate, things may not be so great for me. So with black here, I'm thinking, okay, well, I have two checks. I can go rook takes h3 check, and then their pawn will take it. Or I can play bishop f3 check, and their pawn will take it. Well, I would love to check with my bishop, because then it would just be checkmate. And so what I can do is I can decoy or overload their g2 pawn. Take. And then here is a very nice case of checkmating with minimal force. I play bishop f3. You see all the squares are covered. All the squares are covered, and the king is just shot and killed. Nothing to do here. Bishop f3 is mate. So a nice case of all the squares being covered. The pawns cover everything, and the king covers everything over here. So a nice case of a straightforward checkmate, but we were forced to sacrifice our rook. For some people, this might be a hard move, but we're removing the defender of the f3 square, then checking with our bishop and mating. So let's go. This is a nice one too. I love this one. So here, there are 2 points. So the king has a pretty hefty role here of defending the queen. You know, the queen is the most valuable piece. So in this particular case, here's the thing. If I check the king will run away. And when the king runs away, I don't have a direct win. So what I want to do instead is I want to block the king's route, block the king's escape route. So I play the shocking check e5. Here's the point. White has only 2 ways to play. They can either take, okay, if they take with the king, then they lose their queen. And once they lose their queen, I'm just going to gobble up all the pawns and the game will be over, which is the easiest strategy in these types of positions. You know, like take, and I'm going to take here, and then I'm going to gobble this up, come back, gobble this up. I'm just going to go boop, 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 boop. Just push the pawn all the way down, queen a new pawn. As I was saying before, when you have a position like this, you just run in. Okay, I don't even need to capture that pawn, but in a position like this, just to keep it really simple, just queen your pawn really, really quickly. You know, have your 2 queens and checkmate the king because they control so many squares. It's quite simple. So if I play e5, the point is I'm blocking the king's escape route. And blocking an escape route, kind of setting them up in a mating net, is a pretty advanced idea. But it can sometimes just be a one mover like this. And now, take a look. It's checkmate. My pawn on f5 controls these squares. My queen controls all of these. And the rest of the squares are blocked by their own pieces. So e5 is a fantastic blocking move, putting white's king in a mating net. D takes e5, queen d2, checkmate. So one of my personal favorite ideas. Okay, actually here's a really nice one. Remember I was talking about double check and how powerful it is. If you have double check, the opponent has to react to it. So you could kind of look at it this way. The queen on h6 is kind of like a security guard. It's the only It's the only guard of the g7 pawn. And so basically with white, I'm thinking here, well, I'm willing to do anything to get rid of the guard, because if that guard is gone, I'm going to take the crown jewel. It's all mine. So I'm going queen h3. This is a pretty fantastic move. It's a distractionary move. I'm giving up my whole queen. They take. And what I'm going to do here is look at my bishops slicing through the position. So I'm going to take the g7 pawn with my rook. They have to go to the corner. Here's the important thing. Remember, when we're checkmating, we're controlling all the squares. So I'm just removing their ability to move for their king. Really, the king's only square now is g8. It has to go back. So they try to give up the knight. But take a look at how I checkmate the king here. See my bishops just slicing through? You remember I showed a position before where it was a checkmate with a king in the corner, checkmated by two bishops, just kind of slicing through everything. So here I play rook g7, double check, king to h8, and then I have a very nice double check with rook g8 and mate. It's a double check because I'm checking with the rook and I'm checking with the bishop. And when you're double checked and you have nowhere to run to, then it's simply mate. So this is a very nice double check and mate as well. So let's see, what else do we have here? Oh yeah, this one is interesting from the perspective of covering squares. And what you can see here is you can see white's rook. I'm covering the e-file. My pawn is covering g4. My queen is covering everything else. And my pawn is covering f6. So you can see almost all the squares for the king are covered. So I'm looking for ways to checkmate the king. So I play knight to h4 check, that being one of my only checks. And take a look at the squares. Covered by my rook, the rook on e1. This is covered by my pawn on g5 and my queen. So all of these are covered. The pawn on h3 covers g4. They go king to f4. And here, it's a little surprising, but I have a checkmate with the simple g6 mate. And take a look at how all the squares are covered. Notice the coordination and the cooperation I have. I have my rook covering the e-file. I have my queen covering these diagonal squares. I have my knight covering f5 and f3. I have my pawn covering g3, and I have my other pawn covering g4. So I have 5 pieces working together to control all the squares of the black king. So that's a pretty amazing idea, but as you can see, sometimes chess just works that way. You checkmate the king like this, your pieces coordinate together, and as you can see, this is a good example of why we don't just attack with one piece, because there are a lot of squares to cover if the king is out in the open. So we need to be more exact than that. So I want to show a more complicated case. Here, I can try to play a queen and pawn mate by trying to sneak my queen in here. The only problem is that they have the nice move knight to e8 covering the g7 square. So in this case, I don't have a checkmate. So what I have to play instead is I have a very nice tricky idea, and I call this basically disrupting the lines of communication. I check with my knight. Okay, see how I'm checking the king. My h6 pawn is covering the g7 square, so the king must go away, must go into the corner. And now I have the fantastic move knight to e8. And remember, the point of knight e8 is that now if they take with the knight, I have chased the king away so that now the rook is not defended anymore, and I have a simple checkmate. It's again much like a back rank mate. So I've destroyed their lines of communication, and I've prevented their knight from defending. So if they take, I simply go queen check, and I have my queen and pawn mate. So it's a really, really nice case of preventing both of their ideas, preventing the knight capture and preventing the rook capture. So it just works out perfectly. If they move the king over, I will take their knight, and then I have my queen and pawn standard mate. So that works out perfectly as well. And here's the hardest one in the whole collection, but the basic idea is if you can't checkmate the king right away, like for instance in this case, if we check the king, what might happen is the king might just run away. And the problem is if the king runs away, then we aren't able to get a direct win. And we might just be down. I mean, here, for instance, we're down a rook. The opponent has an extra rook, so we have to be very careful about that. So what we do here is pretty much an amazing move. Basically, you know, it's like there's a home invasion here, and the king is just trying to run away. It's like, okay, I'm about to get robbed. I need to run away. Need to stay safe. And white goes, you know what? I'm a sniper here. I have my bishop right here. I'm going to put it on this diagonal right here, and the king is not going to be able to run away. If the bishop comes out to a3, one single check on h7 will cover all the squares, and it'll be checkmate. So black tries his best. Queen d6, and then I go queen to h6. Now I'm threatening the bishop, and I'm also threatening to check the king with the rook when the king is almost out of squares. So after bishop g7, I check here. Now I have the very nice rook to g3. Again, I'm threatening the bishop. So the bishop moves, bishop to f6, kind of defending itself. And now I play the surprising c5. And the point of this is, if they take it, I will take with my pawn. And now I've opened up I've attacked the queen, and I've opened up an attack on the bishop. We would call this a double attack. Double attacks are very, very effective tactically, because if you're attacking two things at once, you may just overstretch the defenses and prevent them from being able to defend. So this would just be a nice, straightforward way to win with white. So what I was looking at was them playing queen c7, but here I have the very nice c6. And here's the point. If they take it, what I get to do is I get to block the escape route. I'm blocking their ability to evacuate the building. Check. And if they block, now you can see they cannot run away. I can just checkmate like this. All the squares are covered. Everything's covered here. King has nowhere to go. So this is a really nice case of playing a really. I mean, what's shocking about this is we call this a quiet move. We're looking for the brutal captures, and then suddenly, I mean, most people, I guess, would go would take this pawn on h7 and let the king run away. But the important thing here is, if you don't have a mate, but you may have the possibility of trapping the king, if you can trap them in a mating net, in a checkmating net that they can't break out of, then a move like this, a pawn move on this side of the board, can be really, really effective. So a4 is a great move. So these are the positions on checkmating. I definitely recommend that you look them over multiple times. I think you should look these over, 2, 3, 4, even 4 times if you want to. But these are very valuable to kind of commit to memory, because these are the most common checkmates, and I sort of only learned them after I'd been playing for a little while. I kind of picked them up sort of randomly. I didn't learn them systematically and just kind of see them all. But the point is, we saw the mates with the queen. We saw the mates with the bishop. We saw the mates with the knight. We saw the smothered mate, suffocation mate, all these, the hook mate. We saw mates that occurred with all the pieces, with the rooks. So, when you see how all of the pieces can be in their element and shine in their strongest element, that gives you also some insight into how to use the pieces. So next we're going to move on to how to trap the queen, which is something almost nobody ever really thinks about. So let's be real here for a minute. The queen is a bad bitch. The queen is the most powerful piece, and if you can trap it, you might win the game right away. And so I'm going to show you some examples of some cases of one side getting their queen trapped, some of them right in the middle of the board, which is pretty surprising, because when you're in the middle of the board, it seems like you can move around. But, sometimes you can just trap your best bitch. It's punishment. If she's cheating on you, You got to catch her. So in this game, the world champion, Mikhail Tal, well, former world champion, played the move g5, and much to Black's shock, the queen has no safe squares. So it's basically checkmating the opponent's queen. All the squares are under control. You can see the rooks in the center are controlling everything. So sometimes you just get busted. And when you get busted, it can be pretty harsh punishment. So this is punishment for putting the pieces on bad squares. g5, take, take. The pawn is attacking the queen, and the queen has no safe place to go. The bishop covers this, the bishop covers e7, and that's all she wrote. So here Black decided to give up the queen for only a rook, which isn't nearly enough material. White went queen to h4, and then rook to h1, and now with the bishop covering the f8 square and queen h7 mate coming up, this isn't even worth playing because it's going to be mate next move. So he didn't even bother to continue. All right, let's go on to the next one. This was a game played by Mamedyarov, who's number 3 in the world, and he just shocked his opponent by just playing the move knight to h4. And look around the board. Look at these bishops here. These bishops on d2 and e2. They're just slicing through, controlling every square. The knight controls f5, the knight controls g6, the knight controls e4, d5, and b5, and the pawn controls c5 and e5. So the queen actually has no safe squares here at all, covered by the bishop, by the bishop, by the knight, by the bishop, by the knight, by a knight, by a pawn, by a knight, by a pawn, by a bishop and a knight, by the rook. So by a bishop over here. So the queen just got trapped really early on in the game. That's a really embarrassing way to lose. And the guy with Black who lost the game is in the top 40 in the world. So that was really, really embarrassing to go down like that. But I've had my fair share of games like that, so I know how it feels. So in this game, Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, was playing Black and just played the move g5 against also somebody in the top 10 in the world, even though this was just a blitz game. And usually people don't like to advance pawns in front of their king because they feel like they might expose their king. But in this case, notice how all the squares are covered here, and the queen has nowhere to go. It's just completely trapped. So Grishchuk, playing white, had no choice but to resign. Let's go on to the next one. All right, here's one from one of my games. My opponent just surprised me with a really obvious move and just trapped my queen. Just played bishop a5, and I thought, oh wow, a6 is covered, c6 is covered, d6 is covered by the e5 pawn. Every single square is covered, so I'm just simply losing my queen for nothing. And if I only get one piece for it, that's not nearly enough. I can't play with only a bishop 3.5 for a whole queen. So bishop a5 was just a simple queen trap which was forced from before. So I'll show you a really similar example, identical example. Here there's also the move bishop to a5. And the queen, look at how it has all the squares covered. It's basically just like checkmating the opponent's queen. Rather than checkmating the king, that's all that's going on here. So a6 is covered, c6 is covered by the white pawns, b7 is covered by the knight. So every square is covered. Knight, rook, bishop, the pawn covers this, the pawn covers this, the pawn covers c7, and the knight covers b7. So everything's covered here, and bishop a5 just wins the queen. So you have to really be careful to not forget about the queen. It's such an important piece that if it drops off, you might be in trouble. Or you probably will be in trouble. Your opponent will be in trouble if it drops off for them. So here, I wanted to cut off the queen's ability to retreat. And so I played this sneaky move, bishop to d6, pinning the knight to the rook. And so they tried to defend it, and now I just played rook to e4. And I think my opponent was totally shocked by the fact that their queen can't go anywhere. My rook covers everything here. My pawn covers d5. My queen covers all of these squares, and if the queen goes to d1, I just take with the bishop. d2 is covered by my rook. So every single square is just covered here after rook to e4. And the queen just gets trapped in a very weird way right in the middle of the board. So that's a definite cautionary tale. Just to watch out for that. And if you're the aggressor, then look for those opportunities to trap your opponent's queen when you notice that it's short on squares. All right, let's go on to the next one. Here's one where the white queen is trapped over here on h7. It has no squares. So we can just go knight to g5, and now it has nowhere to move to. Just can't go anywhere. So they take the rook, we capture the queen, and then here we just go queen to h8, and then we win the h7 pawn, and we have a winning position. Let's go on here. Okay, here's another case where the queen on a7 has really nowhere to go. And when we just play this move rook to b7, look at how all the squares are controlled. The bishop controls a6. The rook controls everything here. Our e3 pawn controls d4. So there's not much to be said here. The queen is just simply trapped. All of its squares are controlled. And after bishop takes e4, we recapture with queen takes e4. And here, basically, the queen can escape with queen c5, but then we just pick off the knight. And again, we're going to be up, since we're going to be up a full piece with a continuing attack, we have a decisive advantage. So let's go on to the next one. Here's a surprising one. Garry Kasparov, the former world champion for 16 years, was playing black here and decided to play the move knight to a5. And I think white was totally shocked that the queen has no safe squares to go to. Every single square is controlled. The pawn controls this. The queen controls this. The d5 square is controlled. The a4 square is controlled. Every single thing is controlled here. So there's nowhere for the queen to go. It just so happens that every single thing is under control. And all that can really be done is just to either resign or basically just to be down a queen pretty much. So white decided to resign already on the 14th move. Pretty embarrassing. And this player who was playing white later became a grandmaster, or may have already been. So let's go on to the next one. Here's another one played by Garry Kasparov, the world champion, former world champion, I should say. He played this move, queen to b7, defending his bishop so that he could slide his rook back and trap the queen. He's also attacking the pawn on e4, so a real multi-purpose queen move. And here bishop to f3 was played. Probably some other move should have been played to try to save the queen. And now rook to a8 was played, and the queen was just simply trapped. It just can't get out. It's basically like, you know, having your head stuffed in a duffel bag. You can't get out. You're just stuck. And if they play the move e5, we have a nice kind of typical strategy called a desperado, where before capturing a piece or before doing anything valuable that we might do, we sacrifice our own piece to get as much material as possible. So here we sacrifice our queen to pick off a full bishop. And then now we capture the undefended queen. Let's go on to another one. And here's the last one. This is one from one of my games. I was white against a grandmaster. And I saw the queen here on g7. I just thought, wow, that's a vulnerable queen. Maybe I can attack it with rook to g4. But then the queen can escape with queen to e7. So I thought, what if I just kind of tweak that idea and play a stronger version of the same idea? So I can go d6. And the point is, now my pawn is controlling both of these squares. So now the queen can't run away. The queen can't run to e7 anymore. My pawn covers that square. So with everything off limits, there's not much to do. So my opponent played rook c6, and then I played rook g4. And I think he just kind of realized here, it was kind of like a cold shower for him. He just realized, uh-oh, my queen's trapped. It's just game over. there's nothing to be done here. So that was one of my best practical cases of getting a queen trap in a real game. So I was glad to have found the idea of just removing all the squares for the opponent's queen, and once they weren't able to get out, they had nothing to play for. So now we're going to move on to looking over some kind of more general principles like that can be applied in middle games, such as really not leaving a brother behind, not leaving a piece behind, basically not playing passively with any of your pieces. You're the CEO of your company. Don't have any passive employees. Don't have any lazy employees. Make sure everybody's working and make sure everybody's busy. So we'll move on to that in a moment. In chess, you're a warlord. You're a general. And you want to crush your enemies. How can you do that? Well, you're going to need some strong men. And that's exactly why at the core of chess strategy comes the very simple principle, do not leave a man behind. And what we're going to focus on here is activity, coordination, cooperation, and basically just playing as energetically as you can, not wasting time and making sure that you have everybody there. Imagine that a big fight breaks out. Is it going to be you versus 10 guys? Well, what if you could have 10 bigger guys? Wouldn't you want to do that? I would assume almost everybody would. So in this case, we're going to talk about how in chess, that's essentially what we want to do. We want to make sure that, barring the ability to win immediately, unless they're getting checkmated or unless they're losing a lot of material right away, we want more pieces in the main arena of action. So what we're going to focus on here is, first we're going to focus on the concept of improving the worst place piece, or basically improving your lazy employee's conditions, or getting him into action, giving him a job, giving him something to do. So in this particular position, let's look around this position. So if I count the pawns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 3 minor pieces for both sides, 2 rooks for both sides, it's equal material. Okay. And if I look around the board, you can notice something. I mean, this d5 square, it's interesting to note that a black pawn cannot control it, so that is a potential square that could be a good square, for example, for a knight outpost. And if we look around the board and we think about, well, which one of our pieces isn't doing anything? In this particular position, the piece that's doing the least is this knight over here on a3. We can see our rook on e1 is developed, our queen is in the center defending the e4 pawn, our rook is on the open file, our bishop, while in theory not doing that much, can't really be improved because it's a light squared bishop and it's already on this diagonal sort of out of the way. So what can we do with that knight on a3? There's a saying that the knight on the rim is dim, but that's, sometimes it's not really true, because sometimes a knight can be over here or over here on h5 and attacking the king and hop right into action on f6. But if the knight is on the side of the board and has no good way to get into play, then it's usually not a very effective piece. So in this case, you see the pawn on a6 is controlling b5, so we can't go there. So what can we do with our knight to try to bring it into action, to try to get our forces mobilized? What we can do here is we can just play the move knight to c2. And what we can do after that is we can later bring our knight here and try to occupy the d5 square. Basically, our infantry does a little kind of cavalry run and hops into the d5 square. And this is a very nice square to occupy, also trying to take advantage of our bishop pinning the knight to the queen. So this is a nice way to make use of your close range infantry. And just for reference, one thing you could think of here is you can think of your pawns as foot soldiers, your hopping knight as close range infantry, your bishop as a sniper. You could call him Little Snipey if he was a rapper. And you could call your queen, well, let's think of your rooks as your brothers. When you're going to a fight, you want to bring your brother. You want to I mean, if you have one, or your friends who you call brothers, but basically you want your bros by your side. So you don't want them, you know, in another city. You want them to be with you. And of course, the queen is the bad bitch. And the queen is the baddest bitch of them all and makes all the other girls jealous. So you have to make sure that your bad bitch is a good bitch. So let's go on to another one. We're going to talk about the same concept again. Let's see. Okay, so here's another position, and this one looks like there's not much going on. I mean, you can see things are pretty locked up, so it's kind of a gridlock here on the board. So it might not look like there's that much going on. I want to mention two main points here. The first one is that when you have a closed position like this, and when I say closed position, I mean, look, we have 7 pawns here, but we have no open lines. We have only this half open. We call it a half open file when the file is open for our rooks, but not open for theirs because they have a pawn on c6. So in positions which are closed and semi-closed like this, they're really blocked up. Usually what you want to do is you want to prepare a way to open up the game a little bit. And to open it up, you usually, not always, but usually have to use your foot soldiers. You have to use your pawns to break open the game. And so what that means is you'll usually want to prepare what we call a pawn break. So we create a break by creating contact with another pawn. In this particular position, we don't need to do it right away because that might actually help black's pieces that are sort of passive. So the best move, I'm just going to remove these little arrows here. The best move here is to not leave a brother behind. Don't leave your brother behind here, and the only piece that's really not taking place in the play, all of these pieces are in the center and taking part in controlling squares. The only piece not taking place is this rook here on f1. It's on its home square after castling and is not able to really do anything right now. So the best move in this position is just the very simple rook to f1, rook f to d1. So we develop our piece and we improve our worst place piece. And if you look at it from black's point of view, the reason I like this one is that both sides are doing the exact same thing. They're both improving their worst place piece. So basically black has all of their pieces kind of in the center. I mean, the rook has moved over here to c8. And the only piece that's really not taking part in the play is the rook on f8. So the rook should go rook f8 to e8. And here at least you can see it's on this half-open e-file. So it has improved. And this is a case of really simple, calm chess that indicates that somebody has a pretty high level of chess strategic understanding. It's a good example of just calm strategy. Just, all right, I'm going to bring another piece into play. I'm going to bring another one. So when the fight breaks out, I have my boys there. I have more there than my opponent might. So in this case, now with white having all the pieces in play, white can try something like hurling the knight in the center with knight e5, and after knight takes e5, we can actually try to open it up with this pawn capture because now we have some tactical ideas with our rook lining up with the bad bitch on d8. And so if knight h5, we can just move our bishop back, because the knight is attacking the bishop. So I just retreat my bishop. And now this knight is actually in a weird spot right here. You see it has no safe squares. So I am actually threatening to advance my pawn up 2 squares and just capture the knight, which would be trapped. So in this case, black plays g6 to give it some breathing room. And then here, I just ended my analysis here with f4. And basically, with a series of simple moves, what we've done is we brought everything into play. We brought our last piece into play. We brought our last brother into play. And then we decided to play aggressively or only play actively once everything was in play. And of course, sometimes you can be more aggressive first, but only if you usually only if you have an immediate knockout. But if not, then there's nothing to lose by just bringing something into play, especially if your position is more active than your opponent's. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, this one was actually played in the World Championship just a few days ago. This was played between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. And the funny thing is, these ones always kind of crack me up because the best move is actually an application of the most general, simple strategy that every chess player who's been playing for a little while has heard before. The same idea I've been talking about of bring all your pieces into play, develop all your pieces. And if we look at this position right here, if we look at black's position, the queen has been brought out to the f6 square. The bishops are both in the center. The rook on e8 is defending the e5 pawn, and on the e-file, the only piece that's doing literally nothing is the rook on a8. So here, black should just improve the worst placed piece. And I thought the simplest way to do it was just the very straightforward rook a to d8, putting the rook on the half-open file. So sometimes in chess, the most obvious move in the world turns out to be the correct move. And sometimes even great players don't even consider it. Sometimes they overthink. And overthinking in chess can definitely be a problem for a lot of players. So in a position like this, it makes a lot of sense to just bring your last troop into play. So if white goes queen to f3, trying to trade queens, in this case, because black has pretty good pieces in the center, it actually makes sense for him to just kind of keep the queens on the board, keep the fight going, and make white actually defend this a little bit. Make white kind of prove that they can hold everything together. So this was a nice illustration of just improving your worst placed piece. Improving your only lazy worker who's doing nothing. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, this one was played in a World Championship match. Mikhail Botvinnik as white against Mikhail Tal, played in the World Championship in 1961. And I like this one because it really helps you focus in on the worst placed piece. And in a lot of these examples, I try to make it clear by showing one piece that's just doing nothing. And in some of those cases, it's just the rook in the corner. Because if the rook in the corner, you know, like if we look around the board, one useful thing you might want to do is when you're playing games and looking for tactics that might benefit you, look around the board and think about what's undefended. And you may want to do this as often as you can. You know, you see that this rook is not defended by anything. I'll just go around the board and do it. This queen is not defended. This queen is not defended. This knight on f6 is defended by nothing. This rook on h8 is defended by nothing. And our rook in the corner is defended by nothing. So in this particular position, what's the pawn count? 2, 4, 6, 7 for black, 2, 4, 5 for white. So white's down 2 pawns, but has a lead in development. And what that means is that if they could bring more forces into play and kind of break this open, then this could be fantastic for them. And the question is, what's our worst placed piece? Our worst placed piece in this position is our rook in the corner. And you might ask, well, why is it our worst placed piece? Because, well, our other rook is in the center on e1, our queen is developed on c2, and these minor pieces are in the center. I mean, they're controlling what's going on in the center, and they're controlling, you know, a number of decent squares around here. The knight might hop around to g3 or something. So in this case, we can play the move h2 to h4. And what this does is it allows us to bring our worst placed piece into the game without even moving it. And that's a common thing with rooks in the corner. Sometimes you can just advance a pawn up and bring your rook up, or sometimes not even do that and just threaten to take this pawn, because you see the rook here on h8 is undefended. And that's kind of through an x-ray. We're seeing through the h-pawn, the pawn on h6 right here. So this is a nice case of recognizing that you have one really bad piece and playing the most direct move to bring it into the game. So that's a good case of just recognizing that something is your worst placed piece, making sure you bring it in right away. So h4 is a very good move. That's what was played in the game. And then white just kind of blew the position open. They went take, and they went knight to g3, and now it's a very bad position for black's king, because king safety is of the utmost importance, and there's not really much that they can do. So they castled, and then after this capture, you can see there's a very unpleasant pin here, and black just has problems all over the place. So this was ended up being a very decisive position for white within a few moves. So they actually decided to just kind of strengthen their center in this case. But it turned out that black's king was really unsafe, and there was also this tactical problem here. So they decided to defend it, but then now look at the king over here. White just brings in, and notice that in converting this kind of advantage, white's plan is to bring in the last rook, to bring in his brother and bring him to the fight, and then it's going to be all over because look, there's almost nothing that's defending black's king. It's just kind of an open space. It's an open airfield here. And queen takes e4, take, check, and then bishop to g3. And here you can see there's a very unpleasant pin here. You can see our bishop is operating from long range. So all we're really going to do is we're just going to bring in our last piece. And this is just a nightmare right here. So, so white played it like this. And yeah, the point here is that if they take back the knight, now notice the king has no squares. All the squares are covered. The d4 pawn covers c5. So here we just have a checkmate with rook a1 to a6. And all the squares are covered. The rooks defend each other, and the king cannot escape. So a nice execution of domination of a bad king position. And our brothers did all the work. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, this is a good one to think about. If you look around the board here for white, what is our worst place piece? You see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have these 5 pieces here. Our knight on d5 looks pretty active. Our bishop on d2 is in the center. It's on a reasonable square. Our knight on f3 is developed in the center. Our rook on a2 is on the open file. So the one piece that's really not doing anything is the bishop on g2. Yes, it's on a kind of safe square, but how can we bring it into action? Well, what we can do is we can play h4. And now, after h4, this diagonal is really dangerous for black. Because notice that their knight would be pinned to their rook once we play our bishop to h3. We're just kind of pinning it, and if our bishop can capture that rook, we're winning a good amount of material. So this h4 move, it's a nice case of a simple maneuver. And as I said, you can think of your bishop as kind of like a sniper in a lot of these positions. They so often have really powerful long-range scope, and we tend to just kind of forget about them in a lot of positions. There was a position we looked at earlier where we played a4 and bishop a3, and this is a case where we're playing h4 and bishop h3. And these moves are so easy to miss, but you can see that now our bishop is a dangerous sniper from the corner. From h3, go bishop h3, and now we're succeeding in kind of inflicting damage in the opponent's half of the board. And kind of what I'm doing here is I'm trying to create a bunch of isolated pawns, and I'll show you what I mean. Here, a good thing to be aware of is that we call these doubled and isolated pawns. They're doubled pawns because they're 2 pawns directly in front of each other on the same file, but they're isolated because there's no defending pawn on the adjacent file. So there's no way to really defend these if they come under serious attack, let's put it that way. So what white is able to do is now white has control. I have penetration points in the opponent's camp because now they no longer have, for example, their pawn controlling this square. So now my pieces, at the cost of 1 pawn, are starting to break in. So this works very nicely. And also I have this move where I'm, kind of eyeing this pawn here on h5. So with a couple of moves, things completely change. I'll show that again just so you can see it from the start. So I identify that this is my only lazy worker, and I want to bring him into play. I want to bring my sniper into play. So I go h4, and now I have bishop h3 coming up, bishop to h3, and now that knight is attacked. I'm just going to take that knight if they don't do something. So they bring their king over to try to defend it. They have these problems because notice that their rook also has to watch out for that c7 pawn. So their defenses are getting pretty stretched out. I mean, we're doing a pretty good job of of really overworking the defense. So just go h5. And now I bring up my infantry, knight h4, knight d4, and then I just play knight to f4. And the resulting position is very, very good for white. And you can see black has a lot of weaknesses here. So this is a nice case of white's pieces pretty much dominating the game. So anyway, let's go on to the next one. Okay. All right, so here's again a typical kind of thing that can easily come up. We have a situation like this. All right, our king is in sort of a precarious position. It's over here on the sidelines, and the opponent might want to play something like knight to h4, kind of, you know, eyeing the idea of bringing their queen down here. So we have to keep our eyes open here and think about what we want to go for. And in this position, when we're playing with white, let's count the material first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so it's equal material. Our bishop is quite effective because it's cutting off the king. The king is, again, kind of being sniped at. The sniper is preventing the king from running away. So he's kind of under indirect fire. He can't really go anywhere. So again, the usual issue, we don't want to leave a man behind here. We don't want to leave anything out of play. We don't want to jump into going for an all-out attack here if we don't have everything in play. So what we want to do in this case is we just want to bring in our last piece. Our worst placed piece is our rook on a1, our brother. There's going to be a fight starting soon, and we want to bring our brother in to join us. So here I just go rook to g1. Now my rook is here on the open file, and doing quite a useful job here. If they play knight to h4, which is a nice trick, they're trying to take my queen with check and then recapture their queen, you know, because this is a nice little tempo gaining gesture here with knight h4, and I can just simply move my queen out of the way. And if I move my queen back and then play and then bring my rook down like this, now what I've done is, now we have all of our pieces in play. I've just moved away from their threat. I moved away from what their threat was to my queen. Now my rook is attacking their queen, so they just move their queen to safety. And now when I do this, now I have all my pieces in play. I have my bishop here, sniping down here. I have my bros here, hitting g7. I have my bad bitch controlling everything here. I'm threatening to come down here and even give them, I have some threats of back rank mating ideas. And I'm threatening the b7 pawn. So basically, just by bringing everything into play as energetically as possible, not wasting any time, I've established a winning position. So that one wasn't that hard, but it's just about using all of your forces and not forgetting about anybody. If we have a great fighter in the corner, we don't want to leave him there. We need to bring him into play. Okay. Okay, this one's easy to miss. This one's very easy to miss. We have the same concept here too. 2, 4, 5. 5 pawns for both sides. Black seems to be pretty solid. You might be looking at this and going, oh, black is just nice, and you know they have their knight here on d5. They've kind of set up this nice firm blockade, nice and solid. And from white's perspective, well, white has the 2 bishops. They have 2 bishops here, and one of the great things about having the 2 bishops is the unopposed bishop, the dark squared bishop. Notice black has no dark squared bishop. Can be a very dangerous piece because it has no equal. There's nothing to directly counter it. So if that bishop can become a monster on the dark squares where they can't equally challenge it, that'll be a problem. So what I want to do here with white is I'm thinking about how can I bring more forces to bear? Because at the moment, if we look at what's going on here, we can say we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We do have some pieces here, certainly. But notice the black pawn is defending everything here. We have, 2 knights defending, the queen defending, the king defending, the f7 pawn defending. So you could fairly say they have about 5 defenders and we have about 4 attackers. But we have a very strong attacker here in the corner, this rook on a1. And we would love to bring it into the attack. I would love to have the queen over here or the rook over here and just kind of try to go for a big attack down the h-file, but how could I do that? And also notice that their rook in the corner is also doing nothing. So I'm thinking, well, I don't want to leave a man behind. I don't want to leave my brother in the corner here. I would love to bring him to the fight. So how can I do that? Well, the best way to do that is the move a4. And I showed something before where we played a4 and then bishop to a3. Here's a case where we're bringing the rook up. We're improving our worst place piece and bringing him all the way over here. And this is a nice little rook lift, like an elevator lift. The rook swings over right into the attack. Boom, boom, comes into h3, and the black king is in big trouble. For example, okay, I just tried to give an example of some moves. Rook to h3, the rook is coming in, and black is already in big trouble. So, a very nice illustration of just of a simple maneuver. I mean, this only costs us, basically, it only costs us 2 moves to play a4 and rook a3. A very easy move to miss. Very, very easy to miss. I think most people would just play some typical move, I don't know, queen to d2, developing their queen, or rook to c1, sliding the rook over, but the move a4 is a very nice move, bringing the rook into the attack. 1, 2. So don't forget about your worst place piece. Don't forget about your passive pieces. If they can come into the attack, they can, I mean, you might totally stun some of your opponents just coming out of nowhere. They're like, wait, where did that rook come from? Well, it came out of the corner, but you know, you can come out from nothing and turn into something great. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, this was a fun one. It was from one of my own games, and I had a position here where I had an extra foot soldier. If we count the pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm up a pawn here. I'm up a pawn. You could say I have an extra e3 pawn. But my brothers are not participating. They're not taking part in the battle here. And their king is pretty open. You see they have these pawns advanced. I mean, these dark squares around the king and just these squares in general around here are pretty soft. So what we would like to do here is we would like to bring our pieces. We would like to bring our brothers into the fight. So here, I played the move rook a to c1. So my rook can definitely jump in. I mean, here's a nice square to jump into as one example. And I also have ideas of bringing my other one in. Both of them, I mean, what you'll notice here is that both of them are not in play at all. So I'm going to plan, my plan is, before I launch any kind of attack, I'm going to bring both of them into play. So my opponent played this, rook to d7, and then I brought my rook up. And I noticed I have a very comfortable square right here, a rook square on f4, where if I plant it there, it's a great hiding point. I can just leave my rook there, and I'm targeting this f5 pawn. So basically, it's a nice station for my rook. So my opponent played queen to e5. I brought my other rook over. Here again, same principle. Activity, cooperation. We're cooperating together. We're working together. I'm bringing everything in. So before I launch the final decisive attack here, I'm bringing everything in. I'm setting it all up. And then once the battle breaks out, I'm more prepared than they are. That's the principle here. We're preparing for the final assault. And I don't want to launch a final assault with just one piece or two pieces. I want all three of them there. I want my foot soldier taking place. I want everything in play. So I slid my rook over to that excellent station over here. And my plan now was actually to do this, bring my other one up, and then finally blast open the position with this pawn move, which forces them to break everything open, and then their king is going to be very exposed. So they played this, and now I brought my other rook up, and I'm preparing that break. They played this. All right, I waited a second before I played it. I hesitated for a moment. I didn't need to. I probably shouldn't have. Didn't matter, fortunately. So I played this move, and because they were attacking my pawn on d5, so I just simply defend. And now, you see, I'm all prepared, and you see my queen lined up with their king here. I'm all prepared to blast it open with e4. So now I just blasted it open, and they were helpless. So the key point here is that rather than just jumping into the attack or jumping into creating threats, what I did is I stationed my pieces on the best possible squares, and then I blasted it open. Take, take, check. And so I opened up the game. I'm attacking their queen. I have a little discovery against their king, and I just played check. And now I traded queens, and now I took the pawn. So everything worked out perfectly, and then I checked their king, and I played a nice little sneaky move here. I played this move, and it's a clever move, because if they take my rook, I take this, and now I'm just going to queen. I'm just going to promote my pawn to a new queen. Once I have a new queen, it's going to be all over. So this is a really sneaky move, very sneaky move. I call it a sliding move. So I'm keeping contact with their piece, but I want him to take here. And my plan is just push this guy down here, get a new queen, and it'll be all over. So the game was basically over. The game was basically over in a few moves. I just took all of their, I took all their stuff, and then I played this, and then the game was over. But a good example of bringing all your men into the fight and then making everything explode. So I'm only initiating the fight when I have all my boys there. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, this was an interesting one. This was a game that I played where, let's count the material. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So you'll notice I have 2 rooks and a bishop. They have a rook and 2 minor pieces. So basically, I have a rook for a knight, and a rook is worth almost 2 pawns more than a knight. So essentially, what I need to do is I need to open this position up. But what I want to do is I want everybody in the best position possible for the fight. And so what I did here was I first improved my rook. And I did that to take over this A file. Here's a nice invasion point. I can invade on A8. So I play this. They attack my bishop. I go back. They move their king over. I move my king over. So because there aren't many pieces left on the board, I can use my king nice and actively where I want to in the center of the board. So they played this. I went bishop here. I played B3, just controlling this square so their knight can't move. I can't move there. So they're just kind of fiddling around. They're trying to be solid. And what I did was I thought, all right, well, I'm going to improve everything. I'm going to improve my rooks. I'm going to improve my king. I'm going to have the most active possible forces. And then when the fight breaks out, I'm going to be ready for it. My pieces are going to be in the best possible position for this. So they move their knight back. I move my bishop to a nice active spot. They brought their king up. I moved my rook over. And so I was kind of toying with the idea of threatening a pawn here, but for the moment, I'm just sort of preparing the final assault. And so I brought my rook down, and now, okay, I was, again, trying to play with some threats here. It wasn't totally clear what my final threat was going to be, but for the moment, they're just kind of trying to stay solid. It's kind of like I've pushed them to the edge, and they're just sitting there like, oh, please don't kill me. They're just kind of moving back and forth. They're trying to remain solid. They're trying to build a fortress. They're trying to build a fortress so that I can't penetrate. So I came up with a nice plan here. I played this. I'm keeping an eye on this c6 pawn. So they attacked my rook. I moved it back. And now, let's see, what did I do here? I just simply moved up my rook. And now they were hoping to just shuffle their piece back and forth, but I caught them. I caught him with a great trap. And the trap was based on what we call an X-ray. The bishop on E8 is undefended. And I noticed that if I could blast this open, now I'm totally ready to break this all open because, I mean, their men are pretty passive here. So now I blew it open with the move D5. And they decided to not even continue playing because if they take it, I take. And now you can see that what I've done is I've just blasted this open. And now my rook can take that bishop on E8, which is not defended. So if they take, then I take, and this is a pretty devastating pin, so it's going to be all over very, very soon. So this was another case where before launching the final assault, I put all of my men in the best possible position. And the reason I did that is because I couldn't break their fort right away. I had to prepare it first. So that is a common way that attacks take place. That's a common thing in terms of attacking, is that, well, let's say they have a couple of pieces defending. Well, if we just have a few pieces attacking, the attack really is unlikely to work just on numerical terms. But if we put everything in the best possible position, keep them tied up, and then we go for the assault at the best possible moment, then we're controlling the initiative. Then we're controlling what's going on. It's like we can strike when we want to. Once we establish weakness, then we can finally strike. So let's go on to the next one. Here's a good one. Again, we've been talking about don't leave a man behind, and that can also mean when you have a piece on the side of the board. I talked about another example earlier where there was a move like this, like G2, G4, attacking a knight in the corner, or on the side, I should say, on the side of the board. And in this case, this knight on H5 needs to come back and can actually be a very good piece if you could bring it into somewhere like, I don't know, if you could bring it over here. So what Black played here was the very nice move. He played a very nice move after identifying that this is his worst placed piece. He played the move G5. And what this does is now the knight can just come right back into action. So rather than being in the basement at my office, just in the basement with no electricity, unable to do anything, suddenly my knight comes in and he's a full-fledged worker. He's working hard here. And he's a trained killing machine. So my close-range infantry is coming here into the center. So this is a nice little move to be aware of. Again, what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about cooperation, activity, worst place pieces, and I'm thinking about I'm thinking about, all right, well, what is my opponent's idea? What are they threatening? And what's my worst place piece? And these actually coincide. It's the same answer. My opponent's threatening to win my piece, and my worst place piece is my knight on H5. So I play this, and then I just bring it back. So it works very nicely. It works very nicely for Black in playing as actively as possible, and as you can see here, we have some nasty geometry going on here, a nasty pin from our long range, our sniper, as I said, little snipey. Little snipey on H7, pinning that rook on B1. A very nice case of a long-range killer. So this is fantastic for white, or for Black, I should say. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. So here's another one where we have to think about, all right, well, how can we play as actively as possible? We want to be active, we want to be coordinated, we want to have our men working together. How can we do that? Well, in looking at White's position, the knight on C1 is pretty passive. It's not really doing much. So I want to bring it into action. How do I bring it into action? Well, I don't really like putting the knight here because actually there's a nice little trick. This is a nice little trick because you'll see that their knight is then attacking my bishop on E3 and my rook on D2. My bishop on E3 is undefended. Let's scan the board here just for fun to look around at what's undefended. So my rook on B1 is not defended. My bishop on E3 is not defended. And the pawn on B7 is not defended. But for the most part, the issue with undefended pieces is more of an issue for White. So what I can do here is I just play knight to A2. And you might think, oh, isn't that a weird move? Didn't you just move it to the side of the board? Well, I'm coming right into the center. So a knight on the side of the board isn't necessarily bad as long as it can come in. So it's coming into C3. So Black plays F5. I take it. And now, again, in two moves, first of all, I've improved my knight. Second of all, I'm allowing my rook to come in. I'm allowing my brother to come in and join the fight. And so now I've improved my knight, I've brought my rook in, and now I can chase this back, and my knight is right here ready for battle. So they play knight a5. All right, so they're threatening the b3 pawn, so I can come over and defend it. Sure, no problem. They play b6, and this is nice because what white has done is white has taken control of the position and slowly improved everything. So I improved my knight, then I improved my rook, then I gained some space and made their piece worse with this g4 push, which was a nice little move. And then I brought my king into the game. And now I have more improving moves. Here's another great move. My bishop here on e2 is kind of blocked in by my pawns. So what I can do is I can play this move, hitting this, and now I have possibilities of bringing the bishop in. So I not only started off improving my knight, then I improved my rook. Then I improved my king, then I improved my bishop. This is a nice case of coordination, constant improvement, constantly building up. We're building up our forces, and as we keep improving, our position gets better and better. So here, we just gradually built up everything. Bishop e4. And in this final position, now we kind of have all of our pieces in an ideal position right here. We have excellent pieces here. And they're a bit soft over here. They're a bit soft over here on the king side. So now we can launch a pawn assault to break things open over here. You can see there's some undefended things over here. So we blast it open. And now we have these two pawns here that we call these connected pass pawns. So we have these two pawns here which have the potential to kind of storm up the board. So we've made tremendous progress, and here I'm even picking off a pawn. So a very nice illustration, and this was the end of the game actually. White just totally dominated everything. So this game was a beautiful case of the domination of the bishops. They just totally took care of black's passive forces, but this one was all about building up. This one was just about almost every single move was improving the worst place piece. Constant build-up, constant build-up, constant build-up. And you know what? A direct assault in this position didn't work. So we just had to gradually build up. And as we built up everything, suddenly the opponent, their position just started falling apart, started disintegrating. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so now I want to talk about one thing which is connected to all of this. We've been talking about piece activity and coordination. We've been talking about don't leave a man behind. Don't leave your brothers behind. Focus on cooperation. Focus on working together. Focus on having as many boys at the fight as possible. So one thing which is connected to all this is opening strategy. And I want to talk about some of the main openings in chess just so you have a kind of idea. And I'm going to lay out three principles. There are three core principles that you want to take advantage of in the opening. The first one is controlling the center with pawns. And let's think of it this way. It's basically holding down the fort. It's staking a claim. So first you want to stake a claim, okay? The second thing you want to do is develop your pieces. So that basically means set up your troops. So stake a claim, set up your troops. And the third thing is protect your king. And that essentially means establish your home base. Essentially set up a security system. You want to, protect what's rightfully yours. So what we want to do in the opening is we want to stake a claim in the center. We want to set up our troops, and we want to set up our home security system. We want to set up our home base. So stake a claim, hold the fort, and establish your home base. And I'm going to show you just some examples, and we're going to talk about how we can see these principles being applied by both sides. It's very interesting, but every major opening actually applies all three of these principles. And so let me just show you. Some of the moves may seem complicated, but if you think about it in those terms, it makes sense. So let's go through this. Okay. So if d4 is played, let's say d4, knight f6, c4, and basically I do also want to say that when a knight goes to f6 like this, they're preventing e4. They're preventing the pawn from coming up because then they can just take the pawn. And so what they're doing is, in a way, they are actually staking a claim. They're going to put pawns in the center later, but at the moment they're controlling the center. So knight f6, c4, e6, and now, okay, so now you can see both sides have their claim here. They've both set up a central pawn structure, and they've kind of laid their stake. They've laid their claim here, and they usually want to hold down the fort and keep things where they are. So now the plan for most of them, as you see, there are a lot of pieces to develop here. There are a lot of pieces to bring into play here. So usually what both sides are going to try to do is they're going to try to find a way to bring these forces into play and to find a place to put their king. And I didn't mention it before, but it's very important to have a good handling on castling. And castling is when you move your king over 2 squares and then your rook hops right over it. It's very important to be aware that castling is a thing, because that's probably going to be how you're going to protect your king in maybe 90% of your games. So in this instance, we just see white developing the pieces. We're trying to figure out how to develop these. Bishop to b4. Okay, so black develops his last piece on the king side, and now in many cases they may want to just protect their king. Bishop to g5. Okay, so white pins the black knight and also sets up his troops. Black plays h6 to challenge this bishop, and white decides to capture. Black captures back. And basically what ended up happening here is basically black wanted to exert some pressure in the center if the bishop had moved back. So white gives up a bishop, but the point is that white is very, very secure here. A normal way of developing the pieces is like this. I might just simply bring my rook in, improving my worst placed piece, develop my bishop, and then castle my king, which simultaneously brings my brother into play. So I'm bringing everything in nice and slowly. You can see. So the first thing is both sides have their central pawn structure set up. They have a fort set up in the center. They also are setting up their troops, and they're establishing their home base for their king. So let's just play a few more moves. They castle. Okay. So what they've done is they've just moved their king over 2 squares, and then the rook hops over it. And this can only be played when both the king has not moved and the rook has not moved. So neither of those pieces have moved yet, and that's why we're able to castle. So we castle, and white is going to castle in a few moves too. So I bring the rook over to support the knight on c3. I avoid any kind of tactical messes or anything, and black decides to take, and then decides to strike back at the center with a pawn, which usually is necessary sooner or later. Usually they need to strike back. So white here simply castles the king, and I'm just going to play a few more moves just to give us a typical scenario. And now black would like to develop the knight to c6, but would like to capture back with the bishop so that it's nice and active right here on the c6 square. So anyway, in this position there are a bunch of different moves, but as we can see, the central situation has been kind of resolved. Both sides have many of their pieces in play, and their kings are both safe. This king has been castled, this king has been castled, and yeah, we have quite a nice position here on the board. So if black plays this, I play queen to b3, attacking this bishop on b4. Black defends it with a5, and basically the plan here is, as you've seen here, with a couple of moves played, now black has developed the knight. Almost all of black's pieces are in play now, and almost all of white's are too. So this is just a typical illustration of how both of the sides might hold down the fort, set up their troops, and establish their home base. So I'm going to show, this was a case of when they play d4. I'm going to show some other cases of when they play e4 or when they play c4. So let me go back and let's look at it in other scenarios. Okay, so what if I go c4? Okay, so I want to show a typical development scheme for both sides. So black plays e5, and what we're seeing here is both sides are controlling space in the center, and now black can develop their knight and find a place to put their bishop on one of these squares usually and castle their king. So essentially they're trying to, they're laying a stake in the center. They're trying to set up their troops quickly, and they're trying to establish their home base for their king. So white develops a piece with knight to c3, setting up his troops. Black also develops knight to f6, and notice how they're both controlling the center. White plays knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. Black sets up a troop on c6, also defending the e5 pawn so it's not loose. And now white plans to finish his development by putting his bishop on g2. We call this a fianchettoed bishop, that's just the name, and then trying to castle. So black, for his part, plays the move d5, again, holding down the fort, controlling the center with pawns, laying stake, basically his claim here in the center. Take, and now essentially white's plan is just to castle the king and then to slowly develop the pieces and bring everything into play. So black plays bishop to c5, he brings out his bishop, castles, castles. So as you can see here, black has a claim in the center. He has developed his pieces, a bunch of these pieces are in play, and he's found a way to protect his king. So notice how both sides are energetically pursuing the exact same three goals. That's very important to be aware of. So white just simply goes d3, black plays rook to e8, again, improving a worse placed piece, improving a rook that wasn't doing anything. And now white, let's say for example, if they trade knights in the center, this is just for example, take, they develop a piece, and okay, I might just get out of the way. You know, my queen was lined up with the bishop. Okay, I just move my queen out of the way, and my plan now is to develop my last piece. So I can comfortably develop this final piece. You know, I can just bring it over here, and all of my pieces can quickly come into play. So you can see I have a claim in the center with the e5 pawn. I have my pieces developed, and I have my king safe. Both of the kings are castled. And white, for his part, has most of his pieces here in play too. He can play rook c1, developing his rook, and then he just has to solve the problems of what to do with the remaining pieces. So let me show one more typical opening, and this isn't really to, tell you what to play or anything. It's basically just to lay out what is basic opening strategy. We're holding down the fort, we're setting up our troops, and we're protecting our king. So we're just getting everything out. We're securing ourselves in the center, and we're securing our king. So if we play e4, a typical response, of course there are many, all of the moves that challenge the center, like with d5 or e6 and d5 or c5, all of these moves are controlling the center. So these are the four most common moves for black. And e5 is the most common, just symmetrical, and if knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, the most common response is just to play knight c6, defending the pawn, and typically white will develop the bishop. And here's an interesting point. I just want to point this out really quickly. If they take on c6, you might think, oh, I'm winning a pawn with this move knight takes e5, but notice that this knight is undefended. It's not defended by another piece. This pawn on e4 is undefended, so black has a nice move in queen to d4, attacking that undefended knight and this pawn. And what that means is that black has the bishop pair and will recapture this pawn back. So black definitely will not be worse from this. That's an important little trick to be aware of, but that's not the point of why I'm showing you this. Usually white will just retreat, and I just want to show you how black is bringing the pieces out. Because usually black will develop the knight, will find a safe square for the bishop, and then simply castle the king. And white will try to do the same type of thing. So white castles, black plays bishop to e7. Nice, simple, and solid. White plays rook to e1, defending the pawn on e4 with the rook. Black plays b5 to push the bishop away so that it's no longer threatening the knight on c6, so that we don't have problems with that pawn. And now we can just castle our king. If they play this, we just play d6, and now we've done a pretty good job. We've castled our king, so both sides have found a safe place for the king. Both sides have established a central pawn structure, which is nice, firm, and solid. and both sides are now developing their pieces. So white's going to figure out what do I do with these guys, and black's figuring out what do I do with these guys. So I'm just going to play a few more moves just to kind of illustrate how this usually goes. Black goes, attacking the bishop here, knight to a5, and now I play the move c5. And again, I'm basically staking a claim in the center, and if white plays the move d4, again, challenging the center. I don't really want to give up my claims here. I don't want to take twice because that's a little passive. I'm giving something up. I just want to be nice and solid. So I just go queen c7, and I secure everything here. So this is a good illustration of opening strategy. We're controlling the center with pawns. We're developing our pieces. We're protecting our king. The only fourth thing you want to do in the opening is maybe make or react to threats, but those aren't core strategies. The core strategy is make sure your central pawn structure is good, make sure your pieces are out, and make sure your king is safe. Those are the three main things to think about. So that's important because if you just do that more energetically than your opponent, you might just be getting big advantages every game with both colors. So I want to show you a typical case of what happens if your opponent plays the opening badly. Let's say if they do leave a man behind. What if they don't control the center? Okay. So some people will fool around and play on the side of the board without doing anything. And the best analogy, like I said before, is kind of like the home invasion analogy. It's sort of like, well, you're trapped on the side of the board, you can barely do anything, and these people are just dominating your whole city. They're just dominating you. They're controlling everything. They can switch between sides easily. And here's a nice case. I'm just going to show a typical example of what white can do. You see my pawns are controlling the center here. By the way, this is called an ideal pawn center. If you can establish this at no cost and support it, then it's almost always a good idea to have. So black is just kind of, playing a little passively, trying to develop their pieces. I play knight f3, b6. So again, I'm just saying what happens if they just play a little bit passively. I want to show some active ideas. I can play this very nice aggressive plan, and you might wonder, why is the bishop here? Well, the bishop is sort of annoying for black because of this pin here. And it's also the question of what do they do with their pieces to develop. So let's say I play bishop to b7. Now I play bishop c4, and you can see my pieces are pretty well placed. My knights are defending each of the pawns. My bishops are actively placed. My bishop here on c4 is pretty nicely placed, eyeing the f7 pawn. Notice that I'm not going to sacrifice it, but I'm going to prepare. I'm preparing for an assault. I'm bringing everything in, so I have my 4 minor pieces out, and I'm preparing to go for the final assault. So they go d6, and now I have this nice shot with e5. And now you can see, what does black do? The knight can't come out because I'll just take it. And I mean, I'm totally ready to blast everything open. So I developed all 4 of my minor pieces. Black has just been fooling around a bit. Now, boom, I play e5, start to blast it open. And if they play d5, just trying to close it, all right, perfectly fine, I'll go back. And let's say black plays f6, attacking my bishop. A very nice move to restrict their pieces and keep them passive is a very calm move, the move bishop to f4. And what this does is it doesn't allow him to develop the knight right away. I'm keeping it passive because I'm just keeping it kind of locked out of play and making them take longer to figure out, well, how do I develop that? So if they play knight h6, I take and I'm opening up lines. I check on e2, and now I have a nice little sequence. If they move the king to f8, just out of the way, I play the move queen to e6, and now this is quite a disaster with all of the weaknesses around the king. So this is a nice case of just a few moves, a few passive moves by black, leading to a terrible position. So let me illustrate that again. And I also want to say something that is very weird to me, is that when I first started playing chess, I was taught that the ideal setup, if you have a bunch of moves, is to go d4, e4, knight c3, knight f3, bishop c4, bishop f4. But it actually turns out that with the bishop stationed here on g5, it's more menacing. And part of the reason why it's more menacing is it's eyeing some of these pieces. And eyeing the queen and making it harder for the G8 knight to come into play. So this is a pretty brutal setup if the opponent is super, super passive. So let me show you another one. I have one more to show you on this theme. So what happens if white plays passively? Let me show you a typical case. So G3 is not a bad move, by the way, but they have to follow it up accurately. So let's say they just let me occupy the center. They play a double fianchetto strategy, we call it, with the fianchettoed bishop on G2 and on B2. What do we want to do? So I filled up the center with pawns. My ideal pawn center is established. And let's say, so I go knight f6, they go bishop to b2, attacking my e5 pawn. It's defended. So what I can do here is a very nice move. I can play the move h5. It's quite an annoying move for them because what if I just advance my pawn and harass that bishop on g2? They have to be careful about it. So they might try to stop me. Fine. Now I can play a similar move, bishop to g4, like we were looking at in the previous case with reverse colors. I'm again playing this very annoying move, pinning the pawn and making it hard to develop. So let's say they play this. I can play e4, chasing the knight away. And if the knight moves to g5, now I can chase the knight away again with f6. And if they go back, I can play bishop to d6. And now my bishop is eyeing this square, so if they ever go here, I can just take it and destroy their pawn structure on the king side. So let's say castles. I go queen d7. And here, as you can see, white has been really passive, and now he's in some real danger. Because I'm already threatening to attack that, I'm already attacking that knight on h3. So just with a few passive moves from white, they really end up in quite a bit of danger. So this is something to think about. If your opponent plays really passively, you can play actively in the center, establish a nice strong pawn center, and then what you can do from there is you can play very aggressively with your pieces. And if you have 3, 4, 5 pieces in play, then you may find that you're just attacking material and winning a lot of material. So hopefully this is very clear. Don't leave a man behind. Don't leave your brothers behind. Play energetically. And in the opening phase, control the center with pawns. Develop your pieces quickly and make sure your king is safe. These are all very important, and let's move on to the final chapter. So we're moving through the final phase of this course, and the final thing that we're going to talk about is free shit. Taking free shit. And a great thing about chess is that a lot of the time your opponents will give you free stuff, and all you got to do is notice it and take it. So we've talked about killing the king. Extremely important. The most important thing in chess. You can't win games if you can't checkmate their king. So that's extremely important. We've talked about trapping your bitch cheating. That's very, very important too. If there's a free chance to win the queen, we can oftentimes just win on the spot. We've also talked about not leaving a man behind. Do not leave your brothers behind. Cooperate, coordinate. Alpha males lead, and we have to lead and cooperate, coordinate with our forces. Make them be the best men that they can be. That's what a true leader does. And what we're going to talk about now is free shit, and we're going to talk about winning pieces. We're going to talk about some clear-cut cases of just winning a piece, and that'll either mean trapping a piece or a double attack that wins the piece. I'm going to show examples like that. So this very first example here is from Garry Kasparov, who was world champion at the time. He was playing a simultaneous exhibition, and he was able to win this wayward knight on h5, which had nowhere to go. He just played the simple move g2 to g4. Trapped the knight, and his opponent couldn't do anything and had to resign. But it's very easy to miss that because it's a pawn push on the side of the board. We're thinking about development, and probably his opponent just totally missed it. But anyway, it's just a simple move, wins a piece. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so one thing that I often hear when I'm coaching little kids, like I'm coaching a 7-year-old kid, they say, yay, I get to play the fork trick. There's a fork trick where you push a pawn and you fork 2 pieces, usually minor pieces like a bishop and knight. So in this case, there's a way to set up a fork trick, and it's exactly what these kids get all excited about. So in this position, I can play the move e5, and you'll notice that this bishop here, this bishop on f6, is trapped. it has nowhere to go. It has no free squares. That's what it means when it's trapped. So if it goes out to g5, I simply play the move f2, f4, and all of the bishop's squares are covered. The pawns are covering everything. So the execution of the fork trick comes about after bishop takes e5, so I'm setting up the fork trick. And now I play the move d4. Bang. I've forked the two pieces. I'm hitting the bishop, and I'm hitting the knight. And so I win a piece, and there's my free shit. So there we go. With a nice simple sequence, I've set up the fork trick, I've won a piece, and I'm going to win the game. So let's go on to some cases which are a little more complicated. Okay, so one thing we're going to talk about is the value of using double attacks to win pieces. It's kind of like you're pointing a gun at two different people at the same time. And they're both going to try to scatter away, but you have a very good chance of getting one of them. And in this particular case, we're playing black. If we look around the board, it's very valuable, like I've said before, to always be aware of what undefended pieces and pawns there are for both sides. If it's your move, then thinking about it for your opponent, with regards to your opponent's pieces, is very valuable. So here, if we look around the board and we think, well, what pieces and pawns does white have what do they have that's undefended? Well, they have this knight on g6, which is not defended by anything. They have this bishop on b2, which is not defended by anything. And if you think about a double attack here, well, you might be able to play a move that attacks both of them and makes it so that they cannot both be defended. So when two pieces are attacked at once, especially if they're very awkward, and especially if you're doing it with check against their king, then they have oftentimes no way to defend both of them. And here, with one simple move, we play the move queen to b6. I'm hitting the undefended bishop on b2, and I'm hitting the knight on g6. And then I just simply scoop up the piece. And the funny thing is, you'll see stuff like this even in Grandmaster games. I mean, this example right here, I actually found it in an International Masters analysis, and it wasn't mentioned. So sometimes it kind of blows my mind, but you know what? Chess is a hard game, so even very good players can miss simple things. So it's very important to notice undefended pieces, because it might just be free shit. You might just have a free piece to take, and as long as you notice it, as long as you notice these two tactical weaknesses, these two undefended pieces, boom, play queen b6, attack both of them, and you're going to win one of them. So let's go on to similar ones. Okay. So this was a very famous case. This was a case of a game with Anatoly Karpov, who was world champion. Well, this was a little bit after he was world champion, but it was in 1993, and he lost what might have been the worst loss of his career. He was playing black against the American Larry Christensen, and he had two undefended pieces. He had an undefended knight on h5 and an undefended bishop on d6. And when you see these two undefended pieces, it's important to think, well, they have these two undefended pieces. They're both liabilities. Do I have one move that I can play that will attack both of them? Like in the previous example, the best piece to do that with is usually a queen, because our bad bitch can move in all directions infinitely. So in this particular case, do you see a way to move your queen to attack both of those pieces? The undefended bishop right here on d6 and the undefended knight on h5. Well, we have the nice simple move queen to d1. We play this move and we have a double attack. This is undefended and this is undefended. They cannot both be defended, so white wins a piece. This was probably the most shocking loss that Anatoly Karpov ever had. And it was all based on just not noticing an undefended piece. That both undefended pieces couldn't be covered after one single retreating move. So retreating moves are sometimes hard to find because we want to move forward. But if we notice weaknesses in their camp, we might be able to catch them off guard, like an example like this one. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so actually this was a fun one where I was black, and I was playing a player who became a grandmaster shortly after this, and I actually trapped one of his pieces. I trapped his knight on e5 is undefended, and I just played the move queen to g5, and I think my opponent was totally stunned. Take a look at their knight right here. It turns out that if you look at all the squares for the knight, it has nowhere to go. It has no place to go. So my opponent was just totally shocked by my move, queen to g5. And if they go queen to d4, I can go c5. They would move their queen to d4 to try to defend the knight. But I push my pawn up to c5, supported by my knight on e4, and their queen has to move away, and then I just gobble up the knight. So sometimes pieces can just get trapped right in the middle of the board in very unexpected ways. So we have to watch out for them. We have to look for those opportunities. I mean, if we just play good sound strategy and we catch all of these free opportunities that our opponents give us to checkmate them, to trap their queen, to take free shit, we're going to do really well. So it's very important to notice these things and to be as active as possible as we can while catching all of these weaknesses, all these errors, all this free stuff that they're going to give us. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, I'm going to show an opening trap here. So you can ignore the opening moves. You know, sometimes this is called the Carl Khan defense. Not that it's very important to mention that, but you know, basically black is staking a claim in the center. I'm playing d5 and e5. They go knight to f3, attacking my e5 pawn, and I have a nice trick. I play the move knight to f6, and now some people fall for this trap of knight takes e5. And there's a really cool thing to pay attention to here, which is all based on a double attack. And like I said before, double attacks that involve attacking the king and a piece that cannot block the check are very, very powerful. So in this case, what we can do is we can play the move d4. What this does is it opens up an avenue for us to go queen a5 check, hitting the king while also, so I'm hitting the king diagonally with my queen while hitting the knight from the side. So I'm hitting the knight on e5 as well. So I'm hitting it horizontally while I'm checking diagonally. So the knight moves, and now we win our free shit with queen a5 check. Queen a5 check, and here we just scoop it right up. Boom, boom, and there we go. Let's say they play this. I just take it. So let me show that again, just so you can see how it works out. So I play the move d4 so that I get the knight to move away from the diagonal. And I notice that this piece is undefended, and I have the check against their king. So this is a case of just using a double attack against their king and against their knight to win a free piece. So very simple, but very powerful. It's very important to spot these checks that win free pieces, because we may just be able to win a bunch of games just spotting a check, boom, win our free piece. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, here's an example of the exact same idea. This was actually played in the World Rapid Championship a few years ago, and a very strong grandmaster with white, I think, miscalculated and just missed that leading up to this position, black could just play the move queen to a5 check with the exact same pattern, exact same motive. And that's why it's so good to see these examples, because you're going to see it again and again and again. When you're playing, you're probably going to see examples like this with queen a5 check and having a knight hanging there. Or with colors reversed, maybe you'll have the opposite. Maybe you'll have a white queen checking on a4 to pick off an undefended knight on e4. So these things come up quite a bit. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so in this position, black just had his rook attacked with the blunder, bishop to a3. And like I like to talk about with undefended pieces, the bishop is undefended there. And what we're able to do here, it's very, very easy to miss a move that captures a piece long range. And so we play the move queen to f3 check, and we're hitting the king, and we're also hitting the undefended bishop on a3 across the board. And because it's long range, a lot of people have trouble with the vision aspect of it. But again, it's one of those things, if you see a bunch of examples of it, it just gets way easier to find again and again. So as long as we see more and more examples of this type of thing, it just gets much easier to find. So we simply play the check on f3, and we get to scoop up our free piece. They go here. Thanks for the free piece, bro. So there we go. A check and we win the free piece. So I'm going to show a few more examples like this. All right, yeah, here's one it's really, really easy to miss. Extremely easy to miss. You'll see, again, let's talk about undefended pieces. This is undefended, this is undefended. Notice the rooks in the corner are undefended, but they can't be attacked. But they have this knight on a4 that's undefended. It's kind of in no man's land over there. But notice that we have a check available. Notice their king is vulnerable to a check. We can check on h4, hitting the king, and also, sorry, I'm just going to remove these arrows here, just so it's, remove these circles so it's not as confusing. But we can just target this knight all the way across the board, and the double attack will just win us a full piece. So these types of moves are so important, and to be totally honest with you, I've fallen for this so many times. I've fallen for these types of checks in blitz games when I was kind of, like 500, 600 points lower rated. I fell for these things. I fell for something like this in a tournament game against a master. It's so easy to fall for because you're looking at something diagonally, but it's also occurring horizontally too. So, the queen is using its double attacking power to win material here. So they just scoop it right up and they win the piece. So this type of stuff is so easy to miss, but if you catch your opportunities to win free pieces, you're going to be winning a lot of free pieces and a lot of games. So let's go on to the next one. All right, next one here. Here's a nice one. We have a black pawn up here on b3. And we're trying to get an attack going. Let me count the pawns. 2, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 minor pieces, 2 minor pieces, 2 rooks. Okay, so it's equal material. And let's look at what undefended pieces are there for white. This is undefended, and this b7 bishop is undefended. Well, I have 2 checks. I have the check on a2, and I have the check on c2. But one thing that's nice about the check on c2 is I can decoy the king, and then I can play a double attack, checking the king and winning the bishop on b7. So let's look at that. Take, take. So I've lured the king out into the open so that I have a check available, so I get my double attack on the king and on the bishop. And notice that the bishop can't block, and there's nothing that white can do. So I just simply scoop up the bishop, and black has won a full piece. Let's look at that again. You see, I created the conditions for my own tactic by luring the king out into the open, and then executing my double attack and simply gobbling up my piece. So, it might look advanced, but really the whole idea was to lure the king out into the open, get my double check, attack the undefended bishop while also attacking the king. So not actually that difficult when you break it down. Okay, so what's the next one? Let's see. Okay, so this is the most complicated version of all of these that I have. And the reason why is because it's the hardest to see. Because if we look at what's undefended for white, the rook on b1 is undefended. But it looks like we can't attack it, right? Because the queen is covering everything here. We don't have any checks. But we have a way to tactically create a situation where we can make use of it. If we play the move rook takes f2 first, queen takes f2, now you see the rook is kind of opening up to a queen e4 check if we could get rid of this. If we could get rid of this pawn on c4, we'd have a juicy check on e4. So we play the brutal rook takes d5, capturing the bishop, and now if the pawn moves, we get to play queen e4 check and gobble up that rook when we're up a piece. So it's a very nice case of we play a small sacrifice, capturing the bishop with our rook, and then we have opened things up that basically we originally wanted to try to find a way to take advantage of that undefended rook. And the queen was attacking e4 through x-ray, but we decoyed everything. Notice the queen, in this position, the queen is covering everything. The bishop's covering everything. Capture, capture, And now, when we take on d5, we open everything up, we play queen to e4 check, and now we get to scoop up the rook, and we have just won a full piece. So a very valuable tactic to be aware of, and this stuff occurs all the time. A diagonal double attack on two different pieces. It's so common. So often we have a rook in the corner, we forget about it. They check and they gobble it up. In this case, the rook on b1 was undefended, so it was a tactical vulnerability, a tactical weakness, and I was looking for a way to make use of it or exploit it, and fortunately there was a great way to do that. Take, 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 and now queen e4 check, and I win the rook. So this is the most advanced version of this kind of tactic that I wanted to show, but I think when you see it executed, you can understand how it makes sense and how you could find something like this yourself. All right, let's go on here. Okay, so here again, we'll see the value of a double attack. I'm looking at undefended pieces. This is undefended, but they're very far away. The bishop on c5 is undefended. And what you'll notice here is that if white takes on c6, takes the knight, I'm threatening to checkmate their king with queen to d8. So I actually can just play this move. Knight takes c6, and let me illustrate. If they play bishop takes e3, we have a knight and queen mate with queen to d8 mate. You see everything is covered. Our queen is attacking the king on e8, covering all the squares, so the king has nowhere to go. So we have two threats with this move. With this move, we threaten checkmate in one move, and we threaten the undefended bishop on c5. So it's just a very nice, simple combination that has two threats. And the thing is, because the two threats are so brutal and need to be addressed immediately, we're going to win a piece. The checkmate has to be addressed right away. So they take back, and now we simply take our free piece. So because our threat was so pressing and so brutal, they had to react to it right away. Boom, there's our free piece. So the undefended bishop on c5 was a weakness, and it was something that we were able to take advantage of. And so we took advantage of it quite nicely. All right, so I'm going to show an example of a desperado, which is something I briefly talked about before, but it's very important. So in this case, the rook here is attacking the queen, and our queen is also attacked. Our queen on d6 is attacked by the knight on f5. So both of the queens are attacked, and black would love to win material here. We'd love to try to win a piece, love to try to do whatever we can that would help out our position. So what we can do here is we can play the move queen takes h2. And you might wonder, what, aren't you just sacrificing your queen? Well, yes and no. I'm capturing the rook, but what I'm doing is I'm capturing a rook, and then the next move I'm planning to capture the queen. So I'm giving up my queen to win a rook and then to take the queen. So rather than just trading queen for queen or queen for a queen and knight, I'm getting the rook. And that rook is a big deal. So after they take back, now I just simply take the queen. And it works out very nicely. If they capture back, well, then I'm just going to capture their undefended rook here. So it all works out perfectly for black. So this is a desperado because we play this move that gives up our queen. It, throws it away, throws caution to the winds, but our plan is to just capture a piece on the next move. It's basically like you have a piece that's about to be captured, and you give it away under the best possible conditions, getting the most possible material you can for it before capturing what you wanted to capture before. So a little bit hard to explain it, but you know exactly what I mean. I'm just giving up the queen for the maximum amount of material, and then I'm picking off the queen, and here I'm up a piece. So that works out beautifully. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so next one's kind of a nice one. White is able to trap the knight. We're going to show some examples of piece traps here. So the knight here is actually in no man's land. The move king c3 was played. This was a game played by Michael Adams against this grandmaster named Golod, and it's from a real tournament game. So a grandmaster with black fell for this, And after knight to a4, there's the move king to b3. And here you can see the king on b3 is covering all the squares, and the bishop is covering the rest of the squares. We call this corralling a knight. So we've basically just completely trapped the knight. We've corralled it with our bishop. With the bishop on d4 on this square right here, it controls all the squares of the knight. So that's something to think about, especially in some types of endgames. You might be able to trap the opponent's knight. I've had it happen to me before. It's not fun if your knight gets trapped and you just lose it for nothing. So, so that was the end of this one. White succeeded in winning the game quite nicely. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, next one here. This is so easy to miss. I want to emphasize how easy this is to miss. So in this game, black's rook on d3, you might think, oh, it looks safe. The rook is not going to be trapped or anything. It seems totally fine. But take a look at the squares the knights control after the move knight c5. One simple move. Take a look. Knights cover a3, b3, c3, and d3. And notice what our bishop covers. Our bishop covers, well, our pawn covers this as well, but our bishop covers the d2 square, so the rook can't even go there. So we have beautiful control of all of the squares for the rook. Of course, if they go here, we take with our king. So in an unexpected way, that piece just gets trapped. And this type of thing is so easy to miss, because especially when a piece is in the corner and it gets trapped, it's more expected. We go, oh, okay, it didn't have many squares. Of course it was going to get trapped. But here in the center of the board, we normally just assume that it has a lot of free squares, and sometimes we don't even look at traps. Sometimes we don't even think it's a possibility. But here, boom, one simple move, the rook is trapped, and white has a winning position. So simple, but so easy to miss. So we got to pay attention to those things. All right, and actually here's a fun one. This one was missed by the world champion, Magnus Carlsen. He walked into this position with a very bad rook here. And what happened was his opponent played knight to f4. Let's look at all the squares. Our knight covers all these. Our pawns cover these. And our knight covers this square, and our pawn covers this. So the only safe square is here. But now, g5, and guess what? The rook is trapped. Notice again how the knights are controlling a ton of squares. They're controlling all the squares right here. So even the world champion had his rook trapped. So pretty amazing case. g5, and then gobble gobble, and white has just won a rook for the knight, which is close to a 2-pawn gain for white. So really interesting how the rook gets trapped here. I'm showing you some examples like this because I'm sure they're going to come up in your games, and I'm sure they're going to be shocking. Someone's going to be like, what? My piece just got trapped? Well, that's what we got to pay attention to. So piece is trapped, and Carlsen lost pretty easily after this. Let's go on to the next one. And this is mostly just to get you aware that this type of thing is even a thing. A lot of people don't even know that this is even a thing in chess. So let me show you another fun one. Knight to h6. So, white has some serious attacking potential on the king side with all the pieces over here. And black goes rook to g7 to try to keep the rook nearby and try to keep it near the king. And take a look. Knight to h5. And in this position, take a look again at the squares the knights control. f7 from this knight on h6. g8 controlled by the knight. g7 controlled by the knight on h5, and our queen's controlling everything here. And our bishop on c2 is controlling the g6 square. So in a previous example, the bishop on g5 was controlling squares. And here you can see our knights and our bishop on c2 control all the squares for the black rook, and white again traps the rook and wins at least that 2-pawn advantage of knight for rook. So so quite nice that we're winning the rook here with the knight. And okay, the game continued for a few extra moves, but that's not really relevant to what we're discussing here. So that was a nice case of trapping a rook. And here we have some other fun cases. So I want to show this one here. This one's a fun one. The rook on f4, again, because our rook is close to the center, things probably seem safe. Well, we have a simple move that just flat out wins the rook. Now black played the move g5. And again, these moves are so easy to miss because we have a tendency to not want to move pawns in front of our king because we feel like we're opening ourselves up, exposing ourselves. But here, look how the pawn covers these squares, h4 and f4. And our bishop covers the remaining squares. Our bishop on d7 is controlling everything. So the rook on f4 is trapped. So actually, g5 was played, and then white simply resigned. And this was only a very fast game of chess, but still, it's a game between grandmasters, and it's good to know that even in a fast game of chess, a grandmaster can get his rook trapped, just like this. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so this one with the bishop on g4, this one's kind of harder to see. This one's not that simple at all. So the way that this one works is that black's bishops are kind of vulnerable here. The bishop on g3 doesn't have a lot of squares to go to. And the way that I take advantage of that is I play the move h5, attacking this bishop with tempo. And when the bishop moves, now I play this move, and I've actually just trapped the bishop on g3. Take a look at its squares. Where can it go? Can't go to d6. I'm controlling that. Can't go to e5. My pieces control that nicely. Can't go to f4. I just gobble that up with my queen, which is supported by my rook. So everything is very nicely covered by black, and h4 just traps the bishop. So this is a nice case, very easy to miss, nice case of winning a full piece, and just kind of emphasizes that these things can be easy to miss even for quite good players. So, you know, if you're catching these things like this, you're going to be winning a lot of free games. So it's important to look out for those things. Look out for vulnerable pieces that can't really move. All right, and actually here's the hardest one and the final one of this course. And I'm including it partially to show that, partially to show that there's a lot of value in a lot of these things I'm showing you. And this kind of trap is similar to the previous one. Basically, this was a game between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, played in the World Championship in 1972. And both players actually missed the idea. And that's what's so amazing about it, is that sometimes simple moves can be missed by the best players. And that's also why I want to get you to be aware of them too. Because the best move is the move g5. What you'll notice here is look at the bishop's squares. Where can it go? Well, it has this square to go to, or this square. All the other squares are controlled by black's pieces. So if they go up here, well, then I'm just going to play g4. And what I'm doing is I'm removing the defender of the e5 bishop. So with this g4 move, I'm winning on the spot. So that's a very important point to notice, that I have g5 to g4. And so the bishop goes back to g3. And now what I play here is I play h5. And just like in the previous example, I have h4. And amazingly, the bishop doesn't have anywhere safe to go. Take a look at the bishop's path. It has no safe place to go. And this is so surprising. Sometimes simple moves in chess are just surprising. And this is so surprising that the world champion, well, Boris Spassky was world champion at the time, but the world champion who was playing black didn't even see it. And the challenger who was playing white also didn't see it. So a quite amazing case. They have to try to give their bishop some breathing room, but here I can bring my rook over, and now I'm threatening to take the bishop now, and then I'm threatening to bring my pieces in and just gobble things up. So here I have a really brutal and nasty attack by exposing their king, and then again playing the move g4, and everything opens up and explodes, and white's king is in very big trouble. But the thing I wanted to show you here is just even being aware that this bishop could be vulnerable. I think most people wouldn't even think of this. Most people wouldn't think of this bishop on f4 as something that's vulnerable or something that could be a weakness. But pay attention. We play g5 and we go h5, and suddenly you may notice, uh-oh, that bishop doesn't have a lot of places to go. I mean, like if they move the rook over, we play h4. Uh-oh, where does it go? suddenly the bishop has only one place to go, and we go g4, and yeah, we remove the defender. We remove the defender of the bishop. Only the knight's defending it. Once the knight moves away, we just gobble that bishop right up. So very important to pay attention to all these nice opportunities to get free pieces. So pay attention to abilities of your pieces to trap the opponent's pieces, sometimes with pawns, sometimes with a fork trick. Pay attention to double attacks against undefended pieces, or against a king and an undefended piece that's somewhere else on the board that you might be able to scoop up. So when you notice all of these weaknesses, you'll be able to kind of exploit more than one at once, and sometimes you'll just be able to win a game with one or two great moves. So these tools are the main kind of basis for the tools that led to me improving a lot as an adult player, just kind of getting these things hard, fast, and down. And I think if you pay close attention to these, if you watch this video a few times, you see these examples a couple times, you think about them, you'll be able to apply them yourself, and probably in almost no time, you'll be able to beat basically everyone you know at chess. This has been International Master Eric Kislik, and I hope you've enjoyed my course.